This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo in for Nathan Hager. Thank God for that. What a train wreck yesterday. Lisa Mateo here to do it right. There's a lot to talk about within the Bloomberg Business Flash today. Interesting newspapers, too, coming up here at 7:45. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning on international relations, on politics, and on economics with industrial production. Coming out, brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow in your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. Lots of talk about politics. Brad Stone's important essay on Donald Trump with Nancy Cook and all in Bloomberg Businessweek. But I'm sorry, Paul, markets move.
Markets move here. We had such a move higher yesterday, Tom, particularly in the Dow Jones Industrials. Up big. We're seeing a pullback here today on futures, as Nathan has been reporting. NASDAQ off about 1.2%. Some concerns about potentially some tariffs from both sides of the aisle and what that means for some of the big tech names. But it's had a big rip year.
Lynam Lincoln was an industrial company outside Boston. They made ball bearings or something 300 years ago. Amanda Lynam will be with us, and Ian Lincoln later as well, with their true bond expertise. Foreign exchange is screaming this morning. I've got a weaker DXY. It's tangible. Mark Chandler used the word crushed. I don't buy it. But I will say we do have a weaker dollar, and it's expressed. Are you ready? The King of England. Rich, I think we're done with King of England shots, aren't we? We lost the King of England. You know, he's in the pageantry.
Yeah, I saw that. Looked
and,
good.
You know, he's reading the new Labor government. Yep. Here's what we're going to do, to-do list. He had his iPhone out.
Did he?
With a little, message thing to take notes on. But the King of England's over there, and you got strong sterling. I mean, we're walking away from Brexit angst with a 130 pound.
Yeah, exactly. 130 spot 33. So it's just amazing here, Tom. A little bit of a lift here to the pound. Euro also a little bit higher here this morning.
The Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa, what's happening?
You got it. We have futures falling this morning over concerned stricter American trading curbs on China. So we have NASDAQ futures down more than 1%. We have S&P futures down 0.8%, Dow futures down about 0.2%. Now that news has ASML shares lower, ADRs down about 7%. That's dropping the most since October 2022. Its orders outlook for the third quarter, that missed estimates, but second quarter bookings did beat. A slump in technology stocks in Europe. Stock 600 has that lower. Right now, that's down about 0.5%. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield, 4.46%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.187%, and that's up 1 basis point. On the economic calendar for today, we have a read on home building activity that comes out this morning. Then that's followed by the Fed's latest beige book summary of economic conditions. That's later this afternoon, page over page, Tom. To earnings we go. Johnson & Johnson, their shares little change, but it cut its full-year profit forecast to account for costs tied to the number of recent acquisitions. Second quarter profit, that beat estimates on strong drug sales. And Adidas, down 0.7% in Germany, raised its annual profit target for the second time in 3 months. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. We start strong. Amanda Lynam takes an accounting approach to fixed income. She's in macro credit research at BlackRock, which is an important point. And that's important today, particularly with what we see in markets moving. We're going to do some politics with Zach Cohen here in 15 minutes. Amanda, I look at the way the markets are moving, and there's got to be a signal here. I got Atlanta GDP now off good consumption yesterday, popping a solid economy, 2.x%, 2.3, 2.4%, whatever. I got global deflation, disinflation. I got a soggy IMF report. Within that arching theme, why is it price up, yield down right now?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. All right. So this environment of above trend growth has actually provided a rally to lower quality within the corporate credit market, which I think is important. It's mirroring what you're seeing in the equity market, where you've had small caps outperform recently, and it's been striking. I think one of the themes that we've had over actually the past several months has been dispersion, but not widespread market disruption. We've noted the importance of the growth backdrop in giving corporates the ability to navigate a higher cost of capital.
See a lot of issuance?
What's actually really interesting, I was reading through the large bank transcripts. They've basically said that 1Q and 2Q both are a pull forward from later this year. I think that makes a lot of sense given the event risk. So we're tracking at this pace well above last year's level, but it seems there's an expectation from the large banks that that's going to slow down in the second half of the year.
I mean, about 4.18% on the 10-year yield. We're not that far from 3.99%.
I know. We're on that watch. I look at the INGO function on the Bloomberg terminal for the Bloomberg Index browser. Far and away, high yield is the best performance in this year to date. It was similarly last year as well. People aren't too concerned about an economic slowdown, it doesn't seem like.
Right, and also the yield environment, the elevated risk-free rate gives you a bit of a cushion because you've got an all-in yield that is pretty attractive by historical standards. So even if you do have ongoing normalization of losses, which we're seeing across credit, consumer, commercial real estate, right? You're seeing that across a lot of different asset classes. It absorbs a lot of the ability. The one thing I will say, though, it's really difficult to invest at the index yield, right? That the high yield market is very bifurcated at the moment. It has been for some time, where you've got a big chunk of the index actually trading well inside of 200 spread, right? The index is at 303 or something like that. You've got a big chunk of the index that's well tight of that. You've got a big chunk of the index that's actually kind of in distressed territory. Well, I would say a smaller part of the index that's in distressed territory. It all comes out kind of in the wash of an index level metric, but it's hard to deploy capital there. So it really does, I think that sweet spot of single Bs is probably where you want to focus, because outside of like that single B range, it's actually quite tight.
So where else in credit do you find I'm not sure if it's even value these days. I
think floating rate products still offers a fair amount of relative value. The curve is still inverted. So being in short duration, floating rate product does allow you to pick up some yield. In the leveraged finance market, this trade-off between leveraged loans and high yield bonds has been very, very topical. I would say on net, it still skews in favor of leveraged loans, but it's becoming more balanced.
How big is that market, the leveraged loan?
Leveraged loan market is $1.4 trillion in the U.S. It's actually roughly the same size as the U.S. high yield bond market. So it's for sure a sizable institutional asset class. For a lot of folks that want to build in some structural protections, they'll migrate up into, say, AAA rated CLOs, for example. But the technicals across credit have been incredibly strong. So even though we've had a lot of issuance, it's been extremely well absorbed, especially in high yield and leveraged loans where most of it's refinancing related. It's not a lot of kind of leveraged M&A.
Can you explain why tech doesn't want to issue exceptionally inexpensive bills, notes, and bonds?
Well, I think that industry, alongside certain parts of pharma, it's already kind of cash rich, right? So they're generating a ton of cash. They have a lot of cash.
But it's dirt cheap. I mean,
I do think if I'm a CFO or treasurer, the prudent thing to do is to build in some extra cushion in terms of refinancing and pre-funding maturities years in advance. In high yield, for example, we're seeing corporates pre-funding late 2025 and 2026 maturities. Wow. So they're well ahead of schedule, and I think it's prudent. I think that's the right thing to do.
You go outside your remit. Then how do you respond to the gloom crew? Because I'm not hearing the gloom crew from Amanda this morning, Paul.
Well, yeah, I think the gloom crew exists in isolation. The consumer is bifurcated. So in aggregate, retail spending sales, for example, yesterday were very strong in aggregate. But you are seeing bifurcation within the consumer. You are seeing, I would say, pockets of stress. But for the past few quarters, we have not been in a recession kind of base case scenario. So we've been pushing back against that as well.
Thank you for getting us started. With Mark, we have to remind ourselves, forget about Milwaukee. Markets are moving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amanda Lynam with us. Good morning out on YouTube. The live chat, always informative, Amanda. Someone listening from Amsterdam at lunchtime.
Nice.
On YouTube as well. They're at Cafe de Wende. They're having the bacon-wrapped dates.
Bacon-wrapped
dates.
All right, I'll leave that to Lisa Mateo.
That's the way they roll in Amsterdam.
I'm sure they do.
Good morning in Amsterdam.
At an Amstel.
Michael McGabar's never had a bacon-wrapped date in his life. Joining us with the news from New York City, Michael Barr.
Oh, never. The Republican National Convention begins its third day in Milwaukee. Tonight, Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance will speak. Yesterday, the RNC showcased classic GOP themes like border security and public safety. With Trump's primary rivals speaking, it was also an occasion for the GOP to demonstrate its unity. Former presidential candidate Nikki Haley was asked to make a last-minute appearance at the convention to give her strong endorsement for former President Trump and address any Republican voters that are on the fence.
My message to them is simple. You don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for him.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also spoke. President Biden, meanwhile, is wrapping up a two-day campaign swing in Nevada today. Yesterday, he visited Las Vegas speaking to the NAACP. The U.S. military aid to Ukraine is continuing to flow, with the latest package totaling around $225 million. But many Republican lawmakers, including Donald Trump's new running mate, J.D. Vance, has opposed giving any more money to Ukrainian forces. Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Pat Ryder said that the U.S. will continue to support Ukraine's war effort until Ukrainian officials are ready to start peace negotiations.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to Ukraine to decide, when they are ready to negotiate for peace. And right now, our focus continues to be on working with Ukraine to provide them with what they need to defend their country and defend their sovereignty and take back territory.
Pentagon spokesman Pat Ryder. And finally, a follow-up now to country music star Ingrid Andress, who gave a less than stellar rendition of the national anthem before Monday's Home Run Derby. Andress apologized, explaining that she was drunk, and she says that she's headed to rehab. Last night, the American League beat the National League 5-3 in the All-Star game. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
I sat there and I said, okay, how do you top our no? We got our no in the suede turtleneck being suede. It's like, it's like where Lisa Mateo shops, Louis Vuitton and all that. How do you top that? Instead of a black cover with our no, it's a white cover with a guy named Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And it's Bloomberg Businessweek and Brad Stone. I really can't say enough, folks, about the reinvention of Bloomberg Businessweek, which is going to be Bloomberg Business Month.
Yes.
But we're going to call it Businessweek. I get that. I mean, it's with our childhood and all. But an incredible interview, and Paul, with massive impact. We're going to have Brad Stone on later, we believe. And Paul, to me, without question, the lead item is some form of support of Jerome Powell.
Yeah,
at the Fed.
Yes.
That seems to be the lead item.
Yeah, I think, again, for global Wall Street, the U.S. Central Bank obviously is a major driver of markets. And so you want to see what the policy might be of a potential Trump administration, second Trump administration, as it relates to the U.S. Central Bank.
A single sentence, Donald Trump waves away such concerns. Trumponomics, he says, equates to low interest rates and taxes. It's as simple as that.
That's right.
Well, much more on this. I don't even have a hard copy yet. My people, I'm not important enough to have a hard copy. We'll get one.
It's under embargo.
But congratulations to Brad Stone, making worldwide headlines yesterday with Nancy Cook and company here. With Bloomberg Businessweek, the title, What a Second Term Could Mean for Americans, the Economy, and the World. Right now, futures, the crater, negative 52, a solid 1%. NASDAQ down 1.4%. It's a drawdown. It's a correction. I'm kidding. We'll have much more on that. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. All right, futures falling after the S&P 500 had notched a fresh all-time high yesterday. Right now, we'll check in with S&P futures down nearly 1%. We have Dow futures down 0.2%. NASDAQ futures down nearly 1.5%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.45%. That's up about 4 basis points. We have the 10-year yield at 4.17%, and that's up about 1 basis point. To currencies, the dollar right now weaker. The Japanese yen right now extends gains to more than 1%, is at 156.58 against the dollar. The pound topped 130 for the first time in a year. Of course, that on stronger than expected UK inflation. Right now, the pound at 130.37 against the dollar. Companies making news. HSBC has a new chief. Its CFO, George El-Hedere, has been named its new CEO starting in September. And Walmart settling unpaid wage claims that were filed by employees who said they weren't paid for that time spent during COVID-19 screenings. Now, a federal judge approved that $2.5 million settlement. It'll be split among 80,000 workers, which comes out to about $31.25 per person. And Tesla shares down more than 1.5%, even though Cathie Wood said its shares will surge tenfold on its move into the robo-taxi business. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much for doing HSBC here. Paul, we got to take 10 seconds here on this. Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation is always and forever London and Hong Kong. There is a romance.
Yes, there is.
Of coming out of the Bloomberg skyscraper, and there's that little old trolley that's like from 1910. It's like a tourist trolley, but they actually use it. It's not like packed. It's not like Calcutta or Mumbai or anything like that. And across the way is HSBC.
That's right.
Where Steve Major is.
Yeah.
And this CEO from outside the firm is coming in. He speaks Chinese. It's a whole different feel.
Yeah,
for HSBC.
It is. It's Europe's largest bank. Is the way
I did not know that.
Yes, I recently heard it described that way because obviously with the changes we've seen in Hong Kong, it's put more of its imprint on London.
One of the great scenes I've ever had in American politics, folks, was the night John Kerry became the nominee of the Democratic Party. Because of time here, I won't go into the details. But I looked across at the old post office in Washington. It has stunned Capitol Hill, realizing Kerry was their guy. Zach Cohen joins us right now, encyclopedic on said Capitol Hill. He is in Milwaukee. I guess it won't be the same drama as the post office, say 20 years ago, Zach Cohen. But how will the senators and the Congress people of the Republican House and legislature, how will they listen to Senator Vance tonight?
Well, certainly Vance's selection, he's no stranger to them, although he has only been on the Hill for roughly a year and a half at this point after his election in 2022. But his selection really does signify a confirmation that Trump is the leader of the party at this point. They really do share a very populist worldview, a focus on countering China and skepticism about support for Ukraine during its ongoing war with Russia. And so I think a lot of members of Congress will be looking to see how much of that makes its way into the National Republican platform, essentially, not the written document, but what the priorities for a Trump-Vance administration would be.
Right. Are you hearing speeches that have been rewritten?
Oh, certainly. The number of references that we've had to the Butler, Pennsylvania shooting that did wound former President Trump and killed one of his supporters. There's been regular references to that. Last night I was on the floor for Senator Rick Scott's speech, the Republican from Florida, and I saw that his teleprompter had ended his speech, but he added one more line where he said, "Let's fight, fight, fight to get Trump reelected," as an homage to Trump's as he was leaving the stage, raising his fist and saying that his supporters should fight, quote unquote. And so certainly something that has changed the tenor really of this whole convention, and I would argue probably in their favor.
Zach, I think to an outside viewer, the Republican Party's doing an excellent job presenting themselves as a unified party here at this convention. Is that in fact the case?
I think so, at least in terms of the nominee. This is not 2016 when, I'm reminded of when Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas and an erstwhile candidate for the White House, went to that stage and urged delegates to, quote unquote, vote your conscience. And last night he was back on the stage, 8 years later, saying, I support Donald Trump's candidacy for the presidency of the United States. And I think that's over and over again. You're seeing that. We saw it last night with Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, all who have run against Trump in the past, who were urging delegates to support his nomination. Where I do think we could see some conflict is on policy. Trump has said, obviously, he wants to increase tariffs, which is going to worry and already has worried folks on Capitol Hill and the business community and worry about what that would mean for the economy. Certainly some of his comments in Businessweek, as we've mentioned, in regards to Taiwan could raise some red flags. And so I'd be interested to see, actually one of my reporting targets today is to talk to delegates, talk to lawmakers about what the policy agenda means and how much actual unanimity there is on that.
Zach, I think probably the biggest issue here at this convention, as former President Trump would like it to be, is his speech. Any word leaking out as to the tone of that speech?
Well, certainly he's been on the floor in his box seat watching some of the convention speakers, usually later in the night, some of the primetime speakers. This is really his opportunity to cement his status as leader of the party and to put forward a vision for how the next couple of months are going to go. He's really managed to maintain a lead here, not just in polling, but in terms of the rhetoric. At the same time, we've got President Joe Biden dealing with schisms in his own party and whether he should remain the nominee.
Right.
And though at this point he's still in the picture, Trump has been happy to sort of let the news cycle play out in his favor, and I expect that he'll use his speech in order to continue that as long as he can.
That's right where I wanted to go. And that I know the tradition is the other party steps back. Maybe they take some vacation, et cetera. No vacation for Zach Cohen. But Zach, what is the backstory on the Democrats, and particularly people in tough races on your Capitol Hill with President Biden? Don't tell me that it's quiet out there. I don't buy it for a minute. What's the backstory?
No, in fact, there was a large parade of protesters that went right past Bloomberg's office in Milwaukee just a couple of days ago. You could hear it from blocks all around, calling Trump a fascist. And, there were pro-Palestine flags during Israel's war in Gaza. And so certainly Democrats are trying to make their presence known. Security perimeter makes that a little difficult, but I've definitely seen Biden signs. One of our colleagues saw mobile billboards with the Trump Vance platform and talking about all the things that they would do that, threatening to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, for instance. And so certainly they're trying to counter message. And Biden last night had his first campaign rally since the Butler shooting. And so after a couple of days of some relative quiet, they're certainly trying to counter program as much as possible.
Rich, make a note. Can you talk to Zach Cohen's people that maybe we can get him tomorrow as well, because he's actually working there. He's talking to sources and delegates and all that. Laura Davison, she's out watching Brewers baseball. Zach Cohen, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated this morning. Futures at -58. In the yield space, we look at the Sweeney yield, the 2-year yield. And there it is. I guess it's up 4 basis points. There's some gyrations, 4.46%. But I'm sorry, I got a lower yield set with the real yield, the 10-year real yield, 1.91%. I mean, there's a shift.
It's a shift here. Again, the 2-year Treasury, 4.46%. Remember, just several months ago, we were just north of 5% here. The 10-year Treasury, for those looking at the mortgage market, because that's kind of where you see that a little bit, 4.17%. Again, bringing in, are we on a 4% watch for the 10-year? So that gets people's attention here. So we'll see here. But again, I'm going to call out gold one more time, Tom. Another up day for gold, up about $5 here.
Yes, thank you.
$24.73 on
That's
gold.
A new record, right?
So it's just been extraordinary.
We got to get make a note. Rich, tell one of the interns we got to get Gartman on with the gold and yen terms, because yen's gyrating and all that. 30-year mortgage, just what I look at, the bank rate 30. And I'm sorry, it's a 738 down to 7.17.
Yep.
We were under 7% in the first week of February.
Yeah, exactly.
We're getting there.
I don't know about that.
From New York City, with reporting from our team in Milwaukee, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on YouTube. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures certainly under pressure. The U.S. said to be considering its most severe trade restrictions yet on China's chips access. Right now, NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. We have Dow futures down 0.3%. S&P futures down 1%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.46%. That's up 4 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.17%, and that's up 1 basis point as well. Now, that news also has shares of Dutch chip-making machine company ASML Holdings lower. That's down this morning despite an estimate beating orders in the second quarter. Shares of Roche up 6% in Switzerland. It promised early-stage study results for its experimental weight loss pill. And shares of Google-backed GitLab up 15%. Reuters reported it's exploring a sale after attracting some acquisition interest. And Amazon on day 2 of Prime Day, shares down about 1% right now. Reports show that sales will climb 12% in the first 7 hours of Prime Day. That was versus last year. There was a slight problem. Advertising portal for merchants briefly crashed, but it's on to day 2, which actually caused quite an uproar in the Mateo household. Yes, we've been fighting over Amazon Prime. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom
That's
and Paul.
interesting. In what way have you been fighting over Amazon Prime?
Because the husband is the shopper in the household, and he goes on there, and I said, we don't need anything. And he's like, but it's Amazon Prime Day.
Exactly.
But we don't need anything.
I had exactly this
And free
conversation.
delivery. I know what he's talking about.
I was so upset I almost threw an olive outside my martini. What is the racket of this? I don't perceive deals there. Am I wrong?
There's deals on certain things, and it's going to convince you that you need it because it's on sale. That's my version.
I'd love to, on YouTube, on live chat, please send me in your anecdotes of this Prime Day. I go on there, and I'm like, okay, save me money.
Yes.
And I'm waiting.
Yeah.
I don't.
So how many boxes are going to be coming in the next day or two?
I don't know. I've got the orders. I get the emails that certain things were ordered already. I don't know.
Yeah. We have a really good interview coming up here. Amory Horton in conversation with he's not in the Orioles group because, he's governor.
He's not, yeah, exactly.
Governor of Virginia. You can't do these. 74th governor of Virginia. But what I love about Glenn Youngkin, I've had the honor to speak to the governor about this, it's so hard to follow in your father's footsteps. His father was legit basketball at Duke.
Really?
Yeah, his father was like the real deal.
Okay.
And the kid did better. He had a full basketball scholarship to Rice University.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it comes in. Right now, a conversation with the governor of Virginia, with Amory Horton.
And it's the first time that everyone had really seen him since the assassination attempt. The place erupted, and it was emotional. And I think it does represent not only confidence in the America that he built last time, but the one he can build again.
So would you go work for him? Because he says he'd love to have you on the team.
Well, it's an incredibly humbling sentiment. Let's be serious. Right now, the job is to win. And Virginia's in play, which is amazing to say. Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 points last time, and then we came back and won by 2 the next year. And all the polls have Virginia locked up tight. So I'm going to go to work to one, be a great governor in Virginia, and then second of all, make sure that we do everything we can for Donald Trump to win.
So is there a sense if you flip Virginia and it goes red, you would join this administration? If you were asked to serve your country under President Donald Trump, would you join?
There's so many ifs there. Let's just start with the work at hand. And I'm a pretty basic businessman who's become a governor, which is set objectives and let's go meet them. And we set the objectives in Virginia to turn around Virginia's job growth and economy. And we've used all of the tools that we know work. We have had $5 billion of tax relief. We've streamlined regulations in a big way. We've built a great workforce and we've invested in our infrastructure. And, we were just ranked the top place for business. And that's because we really are the top place for business. So my job's really straightforward. Set objectives. Let's go meet them. One of our objectives is to make sure that our congressional candidates win in Virginia, that we extend our majority in Washington, and to help Donald Trump win Virginia.
You mentioned your business community. You are part of the business world, the head of Carlyle. What I was hearing is that a lot of individuals on Wall Street were calling the former president, asking him to pick someone like you. Instead, he went with J.D. Vance, someone that sometimes unnerves Wall Street. He's a protectionist individual. He's a populist. He's calling for tariffs. one of your biggest importers, coming from China. How do you think Virginia would handle, say, 60% tariffs on China and a 10% tariff ring around the United States?
Well, let's first back up. I think one of the things that President Trump has been clear about, and we know in the business community, is that free trade really doesn't exist because we've given unfettered access to the U.S. market, and so many other countries actually don't provide reciprocal access to their markets. And let's be clear, U.S. companies do not have access on an unfettered basis to the Chinese market, and yet they expect to have unfettered access to the U.S. market. And so we've got to stand up strong for the United States. On top of that, China is not just a rival. They're trying to dominate the world, and they're trying to do it at the expense of the United States. They use economic imperialism to do it. They saber rattle, and on top of that, they use every ounce to infiltrate every bit of the U.S. Economy to understand how they can influence it. What that has translated to is a real recognition that we need to not only protect ourselves against China, but we need to fight back. And so the tariffs that President Trump imposed on China when he struck the first Chinese deal were critical in order to rebalance an unbalanced situation with China. And companies that are doing business in China, take Ford, for example. I mean, here's Ford, who has a big market share in China, and then they want to build an electric vehicle battery plant in the United States. And I can guarantee you that the Chinese government put immense pressure on them to use cattle technology in the United States. And now we're seeing that cattle technology is being banned by the U.S. military because they're worried about the influence from the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, this is the way China does business, and we've got to make sure that we're fighting back.
Most economists, though, say tariffs are inflationary. So do you think that's the right solution to this problem you don't think is currently free trade on the marketplace?
Yeah, I do have to begin with, I have lots of economist friends and worked with them for a long time. And
well, the Peterson
economists
says
are right and wrong.
$1,700 per every household. They ran all the numbers.
Well, I know. People ran lots of numbers at the beginning of the year and said there was going to be 5 rate cuts this year in the United States. Come on, let's be real. At the end of the day, I believe that President Trump will use tariffs in order to make sure that trade is reciprocal and fair. Fair for the United States, fair for U.S. businesses, and fair for the U.S. worker. And that's really important.
He also thinks the dollar is too strong. Do you think we have a currency problem?
Well, I think the first issue we have with our currency reflects the lack of strength, the weakness that the Biden-Harris administration has projected economically around the world. And a weak America invites a strong China. And China has moved right in around the world economically, and all of a sudden you hear once again all of these threats that the dollar will not play the role that it has internationally going forward, that it has historically. That's a real challenge to the U.S., and it's a real challenge to our economic future. So I think that part of the reason why the electorate in Virginia and around the country are excited about President Trump coming back into office is strength. Economic strength, national security strength, border strength. They're tired of a weak America. They want a strong America.
But how do you think he actually fixes that dollar problem?
Well, first of all, having an economy that actually works.
But that might mean a stronger U.S. dollar. Like, a lot of people are looking at what these potential policies could be, especially protectionist trade policies. And they would say, that looks like it's going to be a strong dollar.
Well,
Does the Fed need to get involved? Does the Treasury need to, maybe buy other foreign currencies?
Well, let's go back to core basics. A strong U.S. economy that does not have runaway inflation, which is what the Biden-Harris administration unleashed on America. Unprecedented inflation. We haven't seen it for decades. That drives a dollar up because interest rates have to follow. And Jay Powell's done a really good job combating inflation. Let's be real. I mean, beginning of the year, there was huge pressure for 5 rate cuts. And of course, inflation was nowhere near contained, and he's done a really good job maintaining discipline. We've got to get inflation down, make sure that it is, and then rates will come down, and rates will drive the currency. And that's a strong, high-growth, low-inflation economy that is not allowing inflation to drive too strong a dollar.
Well, you said earlier the market was expecting 5. Now the market expects 1 or 2, one of them likely before the U.S. election. Do you think Jay Powell, if he is to cut rates for this U.S. election, is being political?
No, I don't. I think Jay is doing his job. And as we have seen the Biden economy really falter, Jay's going to react, and he's going to do what he needs to do. And so, no, Jay's not political at all. Jay's doing a great job.
J.D. Vance is the VP pick. I want to give you a quote of what he put on his campaign website, black and white, before he ran for the Senate. We're going to raise taxes on companies that ship jobs overseas and use their money to fund anti-American radical movements. Does corporate America have a place in this Republican Party?
Well, first of all, let me begin with JD's nomination. I think he's going to be a great running mate for the president, and I think he's going to do a great job as vice president. And let's be clear, it is Donald Trump's agenda. And Donald Trump is going to set the agenda on the future of our economy and how we are going to build a rip-roaring economy again, just like the one we had in his previous administration. And yes, the business community clearly is excited about this. Listen, the stock market ran away over the last few days as it's become more clear that Trump is leading and has a better than likely chance of being elected as president. I also think it reflects the catastrophe that Joe Biden has been over the last couple of weeks coming out of the debate for the Democratic Party. I mean, there's chaos on their side. And Wall Street and the markets and business seem to really support this because the market's running away. That's really exciting, I think, for the opportunity to build a strong economy, a strong America, and to put us back where we belong, which is leading, as opposed to really defending weakness all the time.
Besides Elon Musk this week, though, no Fortune 100 CEO has come out and publicly linked themselves to back former president in donations. Do you think that's a problem?
Well, let's just start with Elon Musk, and you can't just dismiss Elon Musk. I mean, this week he made an enormous statement,
But there's 99 others.
$180 million in order to support grassroots ground game efforts to elect Donald Trump in 7 battleground states. I mean, this is a giant statement. And I think we'll see over the course of the next 3.5 months, as it becomes very clear that the momentum that we're seeing today can be maintained, that the business community does want a strong economy. They want a strong leader in Washington. They want America to be strong overseas. They want a secure border. We need to combat China, not placate China. And this is what Donald Trump's going to represent. And this is why I think American business will be very pleased to have him back as president.
You spoke to Trump before you gave your speech at the RNC at the convention center. What did he say to you?
Well, I called him on Sunday after the assassination attempt, and let's just be clear here. He was millimeters away from a very different Sunday than what we had, and I do thank God for his presence there, because evil was unleashed in Pennsylvania. And he said that he was changing his speech. And he said he was encouraging everyone else to do the exact same thing, to really reflect on unity in the Republican Party and unity across America. And this is the opportunity we have, which is to bring people together around a common vision that unleashes the land of opportunity once again, as opposed to one where the most Americans have been so concerned economically. Can they write the tuition check? Can they retire? As runaway inflation has really eroded so much of their hard work.
Inflation has come down, but certainly it is top of mind for a lot of American voters with those prices.
Emery, we got to be real. Inflation has come down from highs that were unprecedented, and it is the cumulative effect of inflation that has made prices so high. Grocery prices up 30%, gas up 40%. For the average American family, this is really, really tough. Listen, prices aren't going down; they're just going up less quickly.
That's correct. Glenn Youngkin, thank you so much for your time. That was, of course, the governor from Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, who Donald Trump says is prime time and would love him, Jonathan, in his administration.
Is that his new name?
Anne-Marie Horton with John Farrow there. And, of course, in Milwaukee, Anne-Marie Horton with the governor of Virginia. An important conversation, and you can flesh it out more. Breaking last night, and you'll see it in the next 24 hours. Brad Stone in Bloomberg Businessweek, an in-depth conversation on economics, finance, investment, and yes, international relations with Donald Trump. Mr. Trump is on the cover of the new Bloomberg Businessweek. It has made headlines among the political types worldwide. Look for Brad Stone's tour de force. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a lower open. We have NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. S&P futures down more than 1%. Dow futures down 0.3%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.46%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.17%, and that's up 1 basis point. To commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,472 an ounce. Brent crude $84 a barrel. WTI crude $81.19 a barrel. To earnings we go. First Horizon down 5%, reported adjusted earnings per share. The second quarter missed estimates. Then you have U.S. Bancorp. Similar story, reported adjusted earnings per share for Q2, topped estimates. But its shares right now, this shares up about 1%. United Airlines, they report after the bell, down nearly 1% right now. But meanwhile, its union representing its airline flight attendants, well, they said their members will vote on whether to authorize a strike on August 1st. And finally, just what you needed, the first officially licensed pickleball video game is here. PPA Pickleball Tour 2025. It's from Farside Studios. Costs about $50 on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
And Lisa, thanks so much. We'll get back to pickleball here in a minute. Paul Sweeney brings us up an important essay in the New York Times. With the love and kisses in Milwaukee, it's important to look at other sides of the grand old party. The governor of New Jersey, always the governor, Paul Sweeney, fighting for one's beliefs is essential to democracy, yet today fighting itself is viewed as the sole political virtue. Chris Christie.
Yeah, the former governor of New Jersey, who has a checkered past in his own right, but he does not seem to be falling in line behind
He's
Trump.
Not in Milwaukee, I believe.
He's not in Milwaukee.
He's not on the date calendar.
No, and I've seen some of his social posts, again, not necessarily falling behind former President Trump. So we'll have to see how he plays a role, if any, in the coming months.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages. The Lisa Mateo Show. She's off the pickleball courts. Brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers, they charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%. Rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. Okay, Lisa, the YouTube world, everybody on live chat, they want to know, are you playing pickleball?
Yeah. You know what? I haven't tried it. I'm not even a tennis person, but I hear it's very good exercise. I don't know. That's it.
It seems to be. The big thing is it's easy to play, easy to be competitive, and that kind of thing. So, okay.
I mean, it's not like tennis where you go.
Well, the tennis folks are I think they're very concerned because they're like, it's taking over all our courts.
Yes, but it's like this battle between, my mom's a tennis player and she, pickleball. Push shot. Like, come on.
So what do you got today with our newspapers?
Okay, Paul, is a big one for you. Disney exploring ways to be a little bit more like Netflix. So their goal, not just to attract more subscribers to like Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN Plus, but also to get them to spend more time watching.
Spent watching.
Yes, they want them to stay on longer. So how they're going to do that, they're going to have some live channels that are going to be introduced for people who can't decide what to watch. And then for viewers who, sometimes I do this, but you bail on a series in the middle of watching it, you give up on it, now they're going to start sending you reminder emails. Like, hey, yes, you're going to be haunted by the reminder emails. Like, hey, you stopped watching this series, Mandalorian or whatever. Time to come back. So expect that in the next 6 months.
Well, to that beautiful summary from Lisa, they're just desperate. That's all there is to it.
Well, I think they're trying to... They're desperate to try to get to the profitability and the margins of Netflix. And one of the ways you're going to get there is through advertising. And so, as you know, Tom, advertising is your total audience and how much time they kind of spend on your
I'm
service.
huge. Everybody knows that. And I'm just beyond honored, folks, at the time spent listening data that my vast management staff is giving me. I mean, I'm humbled by time spent listening of Bloomberg Surveillance. What do you got next?
Okay, this one, it's going to get you fired up. I know it. Okay, Amazon is cracking down on coffee badging.
Oh, I saw
Do you
this.
know what coffee badging is? It is when an employee badges in, they get a cup of coffee, and then they badge out just to say that they made the mandate. They came into the office.
Michael Barr used to do that. Just everybody knows this. Michael Barr sits closer to Mr. Bloomberg than anyone in the company. And Mike one day caught Barr coffee badge.
He comes in at 2 a.m.
Went away.
Michael Barr gets badges in at 2 a.m. Maybe badges out at 2:45.
2:45.
He's back in the Poconos.
Are you kidding me? And
yes. So this is Business Insider, but now they're changing it. So now what Amazon is telling their employees is that they want you to stay a minimum of 2 to 6 hours per visit. So they didn't have this mandate before. It's out of control. I know.
You're like the only legitimate manager in the room, folks, is P. Sweeney. So we're down to return to office. It's a 2-hour workday.
That's what.
Is that what I
for
just
Amazon?
heard?
For Amazon, I guess. I mean, what happened to the 8-hour day? Is that now also?
I don't know.
No, what happened to you? Come out of college.
Yes.
You want to go. You're in the office 5 days a week, and your short day is 9.5 hours.
Exactly.
That's like religion.
I mean, if you get out in time that the bars are still open, they can get a beer with your friends before it's like 2 a.m.
The other day, Sunday, with this terrible assassination attempt, I did a 16-hour day.
Yes.
And one of the young kids is like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I said, "We used to do this, not every day, but routinely."
Yeah.
We used to do
I used to
12,
do
13-hour days.
Yeah.
Double shifts.
Double shifts I would do.
Next.
Hybrid.
We're fired up, folks.
I know. Oh, this one's going to continue getting you fired up. Okay. This one is from the Wall Street Journal. It has this insight into how shoppers are hiding their purchases from their partners. So let's say, I don't know, Mrs. Keene goes on a shopping spree, and it says
let's pretend.
Let's pretend. It talks about how said person would go about hiding these packages, okay? So some of the things they do, they enter through the back door, they shove the packages in the coat closet, behind the armoire, in the laundry basket, and then when the husband is asleep, or the spouse, it could be the wife, they put away the haul. So this is one of the things they're doing.
Like a solid marriage.
They're also putting things on and wearing them and just saying, "Oh, you don't remember this? I've had it for like 10 years. You don't remember this pocketbook? I've had it for like 5 years."
I am so guilty of this.
Oh, you do it.
Oh, yeah. I just acquired, good morning, Flint, Michigan, a very rare, beautifully made Hofner Beetle bass from the Cavern days. It's a replica of the Beetle bass that Paul McCartney lost. It's the most desirable used guitar in the world, and this is a replica of it. And that puppy snuck in the apartment like nothing. What do you got next?
And finally, yes, 2 weeks, almost less than 2 weeks before the Paris Olympics, the mayor of the city did, take a dip into the Seine River. Yes. She wore a wetsuit. She put the goggles on. She did a mix of the crawl and the breaststroke, okay? She was joined by some government officials, some local swimmers, and she said, this is Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, said that the Seine is exquisite. That's her exact words as she was paddling in the water. But you know the background of it, right? The water tests in early June showed unsafe levels of bacteria.
Who's the evil elf in The Hobbit? Who's the... Or Harry Potter.
Yes.
The evil elf.
Yes.
There's somebody out on YouTube with some snark video, and the mayor gets out of the river, and it's the elf in The Hobbit or whatever.
That's what they look like.
We're busting Katie Greifeld. Folks, somebody emailed me. They said, "Is she really going to have Gus swim the River Seine?" And I said, "No, we're kidding."
But
are they going to swim?
Do this, I think,
are they going to do it?
I think so.
What are they going to?
Are they going to have this?
The opening ceremonies are there.
But are they going to swim in as part of the race, the triathlon or whatever it is?
Don't know yet.
All right. I think they are.
We'll see. But the mayor's trying to say, hey, if I did it, everybody can do it.
Lisa Mateo with the newspapers. All I got to say is Lisa Mateo doing a better job than Nathan Hager.
Well, you tried.
Nathan doing the newspapers was painful. It's all baseball stories. Futures at negative 54. It's a multi-market, and there's correlation to it. You see it with a weaker dollar, DXY under 104 or 103 level. Sterling is the king. Open parliament with the new Labor government's view forward. Launches well over a 130 as well. Chris Christie's talking about disagreement in the Republican Party. It is the classic. It's a Jim Kruger song, iconic with a gentleman from England, Dave Mason.
So let's leave it alone, 'cause we can't see eye to eye.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo in for Nathan Hager and Michael Barr with us as well. An eventful hour coming up. Important political discussion is what we see in Milwaukee. Joe Matthew and Katie Lyons leading our effort there with Bloomberg Balance of Power. But the markets really overwhelmed the political discussion this morning. Paul, what's your observation across equities, bonds, currencies, and commodities?
Looking at NASDAQ, Tom, we've got the futures down about 1.5%.
It's over.
It's over.
Go to cash.
Exactly.
Darden's Endowment,
Exactly.
UVA. They're selling all the Mag 7.
Going to two-year treasuries, which are up about 5 basis points, 4.47. So a little bit of an inversion of what we've seen in the past couple of weeks.
It's going to be interesting, and foreign exchange confirms this. There's some dollar weakness finally. I guess that's what Mr. Trump wants. It's certainly going to be a theme there on the tariffs discussion in that. Victory lap, Brad Stone. Help me here, Eric. Is Mr. Stone still scheduled to be with us? 8:45 in this hour, Brad Stone with a definitive interview worldwide today, Bloomberg Businessweek. With Donald Trump. We're going to get to this quickly now. We've got an important guest to lead off on what you're going to do in the equity markets. With the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And futures falling over concerns of stricter American trading curbs on China right now. NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. S&P futures down nearly 1%. Dow futures down 0.2%. Now that news, it has ASML shares lower. ADR's down 7%. That's dropping the most since October 2022. And that was despite a second quarter booking beat. A slump in technology stocks leaving Europe's stock 600 lower. That's down about 0.6%. Over to the bond market. We have the 2-year yield 4.47%. That's up 5 basis points. We have the 10-year yield at 4.18%, and that's up 2 basis points. On the economic calendar for today, we'll get a read on whole building activity this morning, and that's followed later this afternoon by Tom's favorite, the Fed's latest beige book summary of economic conditions. There you go.
I'll only read it if it's in hardcover.
To earnings we go. Johnson & Johnson down 0.3%, cut its full-year profit forecast, accounting for costs tied to a number of recent acquisitions. Also, second quarter profit beat estimates, strong drug sales, and finally Adidas down 1% in Germany, even though it raised its annual profit target for the second time in 3 months. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Scott Clemens joins us. He's the Brown Brothers Harriman, but I'm going to stop the show now. When I lecture, I tell the kids, Paul, with their throwaway of book attitude, buy it in hardcover if you can afford it. Buy a real book with a real binding. It doesn't need to be monotype bembo, but, get it right. And sitting in our studios this morning with Robert Brunner of Darden School UVA is a gentleman doing more in this country to help us with rare books and books that we know and cherished as well. If David Rubenstein was sitting here, this is all he'd want to talk about. What are you doing at Darden with your leadership, Scott Clemens, over rare books in America?
Thank you, Tom. So Rare Book School at the University of Virginia is one of the last remaining places in which someone, an academic, a curator, a librarian, can go to learn how to preserve, understand, collect, preserve, and protect the culture material of what it means to be human.
Are our libraries destroyed because books now are a commoditized item? We get paperbacks on Amazon. I'm going through the house. I'm throwing out garbage books that nobody ever read. We're literally throwing the books out in the street.
Yeah.
How do we treasure books like we did as kids?
Yeah, well, the ready availability of text in digital form is great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're all walking around with phones in our pockets and iPads and things like that. It's not very good for the preservation of text. You think about a file that you may have saved to a floppy drive back when drives actually flopped, unreadable today, and that's not ancient technology. Now, a 500-year-old book, providing you can read the language, boots right up. It doesn't require any kind of electricity. It doesn't require any kind of special reading beyond just your eyes. So understanding and preserving and protecting that turns out to be really important.
Thank you so much, Scott Clemens, for that. Am I selling tech this morning?
I think we're seeing an interesting pivot underway in the markets. And the breadth of market activity is something that you guys have talked about, we've all talked about for a long time, Mag 7, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at the other end of that breadth, it's remarkable to observe that through last Friday, a third of the S&P 500, by name, not by weight, 33% of the names in the S&P 500 had negative returns year to date. So there is this stealth bear market underway in a substantial portion of the marketplace. It's kind of good news for an active investor. It means not everything has run away like NVIDIA has. But I think we're beginning to maybe see an appreciation of that and a pivot away from the Mag 7, maybe into this broader selection of names where there's a lot more value on offer.
Because we have seen the Russell 2000 have its best run vis-a-vis the S&P like ever over the past, past several days. I saw that.
And that's been a long time coming.
Right.
In those smaller stocks where we think there's an extraordinary amount of value, and that's reflected in our clients' portfolio, those are also companies that are generally more domestically driven than larger cap companies that have a bigger international exposure, a bigger exposure to the dollar, all the other kinds of moving parts that we've been talking about in this economy.
So where are there certain sectors, are there factors that you guys are focusing on these days outside of those Mag 7 kind of names?
Yeah, so there are some general characteristics that we're looking for, and we look for this all the time. I think it's particularly important in an era of heightened uncertainty, which inevitably an election presents. I mean, anytime there's a potential change of power, change of policy, all the things that we've talked about, that raises some risk. We prefer companies that have a greater than average degree of control over their own destiny. Who wouldn't? No company has a complete control, but what does that mean? Prodigious free cash flow, strong balance sheets, not a lot of debt, companies that sell essential products and services. So one of the sweetest phrases in all of investing is recurring revenues. And you can find those companies in a lot of different sectors. That doesn't necessarily rule out sectors, but quality is going to be king.
Michael Mauboussin, among others, has made a separation between capital-intensive companies. This is Brown Brothers Harriman 101. Old school capital-intensive companies and more modern, intellectually intensive companies. J&J came out today, and I get they got a strategy. They're buying cancer and all that. Lisa reported on it. Is it easy for those companies to become more tech-like?
Like the J&Js, the old companies.
Like a J&J, old style, nifty 50, venerable America. There's somebody in the boardroom, they're consulting from McKinsey and Brown Brothers Harriman. We want to be like NVIDIA. Come on.
No, I don't think you want... I mean, NVIDIA is great, don't get me wrong. You don't want to be like NVIDIA, you want to benefit from NVIDIA. So technology in a portfolio isn't necessarily only technology companies, it's technology-enabled companies. The companies that benefit from that, I think, are every bit as important going forward as the companies that actually create the benefit. That was the lesson of 1999 and the dot-com boom. The companies that were the forefront of that wound up being at the bleeding edge of that. The companies that benefited from that, to the own benefit of their own profit margins and their own competitive positioning, those are the ones that had staying power.
How about on the fixed income business? For the first time in, 12, 15 years, you can actually make a return.
There are yields.
There are yields out there. So how do you position your portfolio for that? Do you just stick in my favorite 2-year treasury at 4.47%, or do you take some credit risk?
Well, we're beginning to take some more credit risk and a little bit more duration risk. We haven't had to for some time, but in an environment in which we're likely looking at interest rates falling over the next few quarters and years, the money market approach, which will still be an important point, it probably warrants a little bit of credit and duration extension.
What are you seeing from high net worth at Brown Brothers Harriman? What is their mood? Cash, or are they brave this morning?
No, I think they're brave. And if there's been a trend over the past 5 years or so, and I think it's continuing, is a greater preference for alternatives, a greater willingness to give up liquidity, private equity and private debt, real estate as well, in exchange for the illiquidity.
Do you see that in private equity, that we're going to get legitimate internal rates of return, or are they locked in with subpar results?
There's such a wide range of returns in private equity, it's hard to answer that with one question. We see the most opportunities in sort of the middle to lower market private equity, not the big LBO and larger deals.
How about private credit? That's something that when I was in the business, wasn't really a business. You went to the banks for
It was
your
called a
leverage
bank,
loan.
right?
Yep.
Well, so for Brown Brothers Harriman to be a 206-year-old bank, we like to think that private credit we've been in since 1818.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it plays a role, but like anything else, it requires analysis. It requires a fair appreciation of where the value and where the risk is, and I would prefer to see people executing on private credit who were around for 2008 and 2009. I'm old enough to know whenever someone says, well, this has never happened, or it always happens this way, that's when my antenna go up to say ever and never are very long times.
Yep.
Yeah. Scott Clements, thank you so much for Brown Brothers Harriman this morning. A difficult day for the market. Futures down 1%. S&P futures down 1%. With their news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Two of Donald Trump's chief opponents for the nomination early on have now pledged their full support at the Republican National Convention. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has more on day 2 of the RNC.
Nikki Haley saying, make no mistake,
Donald Trump has my strong endorsement, period.
and that people don't have to agree on everything.
We agree on keeping America strong. We agree on keeping America safe.
And Ron DeSantis?
Life was more affordable when Donald Trump was president. Our border was safer under the Trump administration, and our country was respected when Donald Trump was our commander-in-chief.
Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Tonight, Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, will speak. President Biden wraps up a visit to Nevada on the campaign trail today. Yesterday, Biden spoke at the 115th NAACP National Convention in Las Vegas. And while he called for toning down the political rhetoric, President Biden criticized Donald Trump for something he said during their debate last month.
Here's what he thinks of black jobs. I love his phrase, black jobs. Tells a lot about the man and about his character. Folks, I know what a black job is. It's the Vice President of the United States.
Biden added Harris is not only a great vice president, she could be president of the United States. Thai police have found traces of cyanide in the cups of 6 people who were found dead in a central Bangkok luxury hotel. The bodies were found in the Grand Hyatt Erawan Hotel. Upon checking records, there were no other visitors to the room apart from the 6 who were found dead after failing to check out. Finally, in baseball, the American League beat the National League 5-3 in last night's All-Star game. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr goes there. Michael Barr and I talked about this. First thing, I came in this morning at 5:55, and Barr had already been here for 3 hours. And they got to get back to where the players in the All-Star game were their home.
That was
goodness, yes.
I've seen it all over social media, so you're not alone there, Tom. There's a lot of
Well, Fred Lynn, who has a little bit of experience at this,
Red
was
Sox.
basically livid.
Yeah.
He has center field for the Boston Red Sox always. But, Michael Barr, there used to be a magic. You were an American League team, and there was a jersey from the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yes, you knew.
And you've never seen it.
Back in the day, who was in the American League and who was in the National League, and you appreciated that every member who made the All-Star team was in their jersey. And okay, I'll stop.
Of course, Lisa, Michael Barr did not mention to me that Jarren Duran of the Red Sox was the MVP. I mean, you don't care. The Yankees,
missed out on
can
that
the
one.
Yankees play any worse as they come out of the All-Star break, Lisa Mateo?
I don't know. All I
Big
hear is
second
my
half.
family complaining every single day about it. It's very frustrating.
There's your
Big
baseball
second.
chat. Rich Truman was like, why are we talking about baseball? I'm sorry, the uniform thing's an
Hockey's over.
outrage. An absolute outrage. I don't know. There's your baseball talk for the morning. We had a VIX over 13.89. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling after the S&P 500 notched a fresh all-time high yesterday. S&P futures right now down about 0.8%. Dow futures down 0.2%, but NASDAQ futures down more than 1%. We have the two-year yield at 4.47%. That's up 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.18%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies right now, we have the dollar weaker. We have the Japanese yen extending gains of more than 1% at 156.53 against the dollar. We have the pound top 130 for the first time in a year. Right now, the British pound at 130.27 against the dollar. To earnings we go. First Horizon down 5%. Reported adjusted earnings per share for the second quarter missed estimates. And then you have U.S. Bancorp shares up 1%. Reported adjusted earnings per share for Q2 that topped estimates. United Airlines also reports after the bell, down 1% right now ahead of it. Meanwhile, that union representing its airline flight attendants, well, they said their members will vote on whether to authorize a strike on August 1st. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Amanda Lynam, BlackRock, with us to start the 7 o'clock hour. Now we continue strong on your study of fixed income. Price up, yield down. Ian Lyngan joins us with BMO Capital Market. Ian, you have a Wall Street noted call of a 10-year yield before 4%. Is this the thrust of an inertial force that will take the yield on the 10-year below 4%?
Well, I do think that we're in the midst of a repricing further out the curve. I do think there does tend to be a strong seasonal bias in 30-year yield to drift lower over the course of the summer. And there's really nothing to stop a rally in the 10-year sector outside of some of the political uncertainty as we come into November. The Fed's already told us, for all intents and purposes, that a rate cut is coming, most likely in September, with more to follow. So it follows intuitively that there should be some downward pressure on both nominal and real yields between now and the end of the year.
Ian, we got the 10-year Treasury now trading around 4.18%. Where do you think that is year-end?
I think that we end 2024 with 10-year yields at 3.95, give or take. Might be a little bit lower, depending on how the real economy develops and whether or not there is a post-election fiscal stimulus program that's rolled out in 2025.
So, again, what's the trade in the marketplace, Ian? When you talk to clients at BMO, are they positioning right now for lower rates, or are they still kind of in a wait-and-see kind of mode?
I think that this year's big macro trade was always going to be the cyclical re-steepening of the curve, 210s in particular. 530s has already started to steepen out pretty significantly. But given how difficult it has been for the curve to move back into positive territory, the primary theme among clients at this moment has been a wait-and-see approach, simply looking for confirmation that the Fed's finally going to deliver that first rate hike and then going forward. Because keep in mind, we've had a lot of false starts over the course of this cycle, and people are wary.
All right, Ian, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Ian Lyngan, head of U.S. rates, BMO Capital Markets. A little tough on the audio.
We'll get Ian back in and we'll get the audio straightened out as well. He's been absolutely exquisite. Of course, his note is incredibly dense and is read worldwide from BMO Capital Markets, and he pieces together a broader price up. And I guess the distinction that I heard between Amanda Lynam and Ian Lyngan is Amanda's really focused on price up, yield down for lesser quality paper.
Exactly.
Where Ian's looking at full faith and credit.
Full faith and credit, and talking about for the 10-year, and we've heard this from Ira Jersey as well. And the interesting is just simply 10-year Treasury. Can we get below 4%? That's kind of a significant level for, I think,
huge
that
level.
piece of paper.
I agree.
And because remember, again, on the 2-year, we're just at a little over 5% right now.
Again, there's a nominal space as well. And for me, the inflation-adjusted space is really important. The 10-year yield to 4 digits, 1.8981%. Paul, that was 2.10,
yes,
2.12, 2 cups of Sanka ago.
Exactly.
And the answer is the real yield's coming down. And I'll respectfully suggest underplayed here is China's slowdown. Mm-hmm. And maybe we heard from the IMF where they're giving you some gloom on a 3.2-ish global economy.
Yep.
And we're all going, oh no, the U.S. is different. And I'm saying, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But the yield, there's no question we've seen a shift here in the second, third week of July.
Yeah, I think some of the recent economic data has kind of confirmed that as well. But it's clearly that the bond market is well ahead of this Federal Reserve. Whether the Fed wants to cut in September or December, the market's already moving there.
I want to go to something in entertainment. We were talking about Disney earlier with Lisa Mateo. Paul Sweeney, now that there's a deal for Paramount, how long does it take, and does the government step in to review it? In the old days, it would.
The government will step in to review it, but I think this deal gets passed because ByteDance is very small. There's no real concentration risk in that industry, and quite frankly. So I think from what I read, from some of these analysts who follow the antitrust, that this deal will get reviewed, but it will be approved. And so the question, I think, really is the capitalization of this company going forward. How much will Skydance really put into this company to refinance the balance sheet? Because that's been a real challenge for Paramount as they try to turn their streaming business from a loss EBITDA negative to EBITDA positive.
And we're efforting Mario Gabelli to get him in here to really give us some shareholder.
Because Tom, you remember he owns the voting stock just like Sherry Redstone owns.
Right.
So he was able to go in over 20 years and build this position. So he had a say at the table there as well. So he's going to get paid a premium for his shares, just not the same premium that Sherry Redstone gets.
I just look at it, and I can't say enough about the new Nielsen guide where it's 60,000 feet, but I just the urgency to get to Labor Day or at the most October 1st and figure out what we're watching in our living room.
Yep,
it's got to be front and center. There's no other topic at hand.
No, and what we're seeing from the streaming companies, Tom, is, and this is started maybe 18 months ago, is a focus not so much on growing subscribers, but actually delivering cash flow, turning a profit. And so how do you do that? Well, you try to continue to raise prices and you cut your investment in programming. You just can't spend the amount of money they were spending here. It was multiples above what the linear networks were spending, even in HBO.
You go to the DES screen and you can easily figure out the earnings date for any company, the description screen of the Bloomberg Professional Service. Microsoft, July 30. We will see their earnings report. A small startup, NVIDIA.
Oh, boy.
August 28th, a good solid month later. And Apple, I think, particularly up 40% off the roadshow thing. I got to get the sim. I still type in APPL.
I know.
What
were they
was
thinking
Steve
back in
Jobs
the day?
thinking about then? August 1 is where we are. And to me, that it's become bigger than the bank earnings because the bank earnings are basically JP Morgan and what's everybody else doing.
Exactly. And
we
I think,
care about it. But
right. And I think when we get some of these strategists in here, Tom, and fund managers, I think there's some concern out there that if these tech companies don't continue to meet and exceed the bar in terms of their top line, there's some risk not only to their stocks, to the tech sector in general, but maybe to the market overall, because AI was a major driver, has been a major driver in 2023.
But didn't we say this 90 days ago?
We did.
Like 90 days ago,
and they delivered.
What you just said is exactly what we were all angst about.
Exactly right. And they, by and large, delivered. And so you get these NVIDIA revenue guides and other cloud guides, and it's just extraordinary in terms of the growth. So that's what this market has been driven by, in part, and that's what likely needs to continue.
In our 9 o'clock hour, James Stavridis will join us, the former NATO Supreme Commander. We're a little beyond the NATO meeting, but certainly we can talk to James Stavridis about the political debate, the promises of Republicans and Democrats as we fund an expansion, a projection of our Navy and our military worldwide. That's really going to be timely with Admiral Stavridis. We'll do that in the 9 o'clock hour. Program note, West Texas Intermediate, are we going to see a 79 handle? $81.46 right now on weaker oil over the last number of days. Brent crude, $84 a barrel. And as Paul mentioned, gold up $11. Wow. I'm on the $2,500 watch on gold. My mother had Kruger Rands in the bedroom dresser. I didn't get any of them. Think what they'd be worth now. I could retire. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures under pressure. The U.S. said to be considering its most severe trade restrictions yet on China's chips access. Right now, NASDAQ futures down nearly 1.5%. We have S&P futures down just about 1%. Dow futures down 0.2%. That news also has shares of Dutch chip-making machine company ASML Holdings lower. Those ADRs down about 7%, despite its estimate beating orders in the second quarter. Now we head to the bond market. The 2-year yield, 4.46%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.18%, and that's up 1 basis point. A few companies making news. HSBC has a new chief. Its CFO, George Elhedery, has been named its new CEO starting off in September. ADRs right now down about 0.1%. And Tesla down nearly 2%, even though Cathie Wood said its shares will surge tenfold on its move into the robo-taxi business. And for those who think artificial intelligence won't make your life any better, well, here's something to consider. The FCC calling for the development of AI tools to filter out robocalls. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
You got my attention here. I'm all AI. When did they're getting, do you agree, Lisa, they're getting worse?
No, but they want it to end the robocall, so that's why they want to use AI for that. I mean, I'm all for that.
I'm begging. It starts about 9:30 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
I must get 6 of them before dinner time.
6.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Robocalls?
Well, they're just calls out of nowhere. You know?
Oh, I get this too. But now what I'm getting from the Democratic Party in text
you're
for
getting
money,
political
like
calls?
10 a day, 10
Really?
texts a day.
Text messages?
Yeah.
Oh.
I block them. I try to figure out how to do it. Republicans too. I'm fair and balanced on who I block. I don't block Lisa Mateo. Thank you, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. Economic data out, housing data. It's sort of a little bit sprightly there. Doesn't move the equity markets, but housing data simply does better. The 2-year yield now up 5 basis points, 4.47%. Housing starts nicely better.
Yep.
Month over month, McKee says, watch, 1.8%. It came in at 3% as an example. Industrial production's a big deal. Do you still look, Paul?
I still look at industrial.
At CapU.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
CapU smokestacks. I guess it matters still. We'll have to see. Our economic indicators through the week brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technology. It's been too long. Scott Soshnick here joining us right now. Excuse me, Steven Soshnick. I'm thinking of Scott Soshnick, sports guy.
It happens all the time.
Okay. Does your son play hockey too? Is he a goalie?
My son was a hockey player. One of the kids played hockey, but he gave it up to ski.
Scott Soshnick spent 14 days in a row in ice rinks.
Wow.
With a Starbucks in his hand,
like
the travel thing and all that.
10-year-old.
Steven Soshnick joining us with Interactive Brokers. We need a correction, right? Is this it?
Good morning, Tom, first of all. It's a little early to say that a 1% sell-off this morning is the correction, but we do need something to basically let the steam out of the market. I look at corrections as, sort of the pressure valve of the market. Every so often you build the pressure, and the more it builds, the worse it gets. And so I think a little bit of a healthy correction is not necessarily a bad idea here. The question is why and how do we end up getting it? What's the cause?
I guess one of the concerns in the market, Steve, is just this concentration risk we have, where these Magnificent Seven names represent so much of the outperformance in the market, or so much of the performance of the markets, and a lot of stocks. Earlier guest said maybe up to a third of them have negative returns this year in the S&P 500. How much of a risk is that to the overall market, I guess?
Quite frankly, it's enormous, Paul. I think the problem you have is, and we're seeing it this morning, where the stocks that are getting hit hardest are those Mag 7 stocks. Now, we've been able for much of the last week or two to be able to rotate without much damage to the S&P. The problem is if those stocks get hit really hard, and again, coming into earnings season, the risk of any of them getting hit hard is just a little bit a little bit greater. If you get enough of a sell-off in the Mag 7, it's going to drag the other 493 with it, because people have been putting money into spiders, into index funds, et cetera, thinking they're very well diversified, except for the fact that 8 stocks make up over a third of the index, so you're not diversified.
I looked at a portfolio, a diversified portfolio with a legitimate R squared, not like some odd fund, a normal fund. Are you ready? Facebook is 13% of the fund because it's just gone up so much. I think they've just said we're not selling it as well. What's the analog right now? You've got a few miles under the belt. What is the analog of this bull market right now? What's it look like in the past?
You know, the history doesn't, as you know, it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. I think there are elements of the 1999-2000 era. I think AI has gotten that kind of hype. And let me stipulate that the internet proved to be as hype-worthy as we all thought it was going to be, but the time to pay off wasn't as quick as everybody thought it was going to be. And I'm afraid that AI is hitting that. I mean, the robocall stuff that Lisa mentioned sounds great, but that's not moving the bottom line for a lot of companies. And actually, Mark Zuckerberg warned of this in the last conference call, saying it was going to take longer and cost more money for AI to provide meaningful bottom line returns. If the companies even just stop, basically stop buying new chips all the time and just develop what they have, that in a sense becomes a risk to the AI trade because it doesn't happen as quickly. There's all, but then there's elements to have other frothy markets, but there's definitely a lot of froth in here.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you do here? I mean, we've even seen just over the last, week or so, small cap stocks. Just look at the Russell 2000 really outperforming the market. We rarely, if ever, see that. What do you take about that move into small caps?
It's funny because I don't love small caps on a fundamental basis. Most of them lose money, but essentially the Russell 2000 broke out. It's classic chart breakout. We went right above the 52-week moving out, 52-week highs. Off we went. It's also, you got to remember that not only is it an index of small caps, it's not that big in and of itself. The entire market cap of the Russell 2000 is less than Apple, I believe. Yeah. And so if you get these things moving, off they go, and that's what we're seeing.
Well, you were on we were on break, Paul. I did the $4 trillion price on Apple. It's roughly $260 per share. We're at $230 on Apple.
Yep.
And if they just go up $30, it's a $4 trillion company.
Yep. Thank you, Dan.
Roughly.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's that kind of speed.
That's kind of speed. So I mean, what do we do here? Do we look for value outside of these big names? Do we? Where do we go? I mean, because you got to be diversified, supposedly.
I do think putting money into value stocks, into dividend-paying stocks, is not a bad idea. If we do get a little bit of a shakeout, they will outperform at some way, shape, or form. If nothing else, a good dividend is a bit of ballast.
It must be a bull market because I'm praying for, as you just say, Steve, a shakeout. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
But I think we need it. That's kind of the thesis. The Jess Menton's report yesterday was excellent. Jess Menton did the report yesterday with 350 days without a 2% correction. And of course the other two were right before the global financial crisis and right before Volmageddon. So that's where where my thesis comes in. That so I expanded upon it yesterday.
We're making a joke about Jess Menton because it's a drinking game here at Surveillance. Every time we mention Jess Menton, I have a Sanka, sip of Sanka as well. What are you seeing at Interactive Brokers? What are you seeing among, what's the exuberance like day to day?
Our customers continue to basically be on the buy side. We send we sort of do the statistics. I see them from 40,000 feet because I can't see individual customer accounts. Let me just be very clear of that on the radio. But of our top 25 most active stocks, 24 were to the buy side last week. And this is pretty consistent. Right. They're buying the AI names that you'd think. Tesla has overtaken the top slot from NVIDIA thanks to this most recent route. DJT got very popular. Our customers love volatility and high volume, and they gravitate toward it.
That's the modern game.
Basically, yes. Yeah.
So no one at Interactive Brokers has gray hair. Nobody in none of their
present company excluded.
Stephen Soshnick, thank you so much, Chief Investment Strategist with Interactive Brokers this morning. Greatly appreciated. Futures negative 56. There is a weight to the tape. I had a VIX over 14. Right now, 13. 0.95. On the VIX, the yield space, higher yields. I'm watching the 10-year real yield, 1.89%. We really haven't seen a disinflationary breakdown there, higher prices, lower yields, but we're watching that as well. And dollar weaker sterling. I can't afford to go to London. 130. Pharaoh's killing it. He's paid in pounds.
Yeah. Player.
He's a player.
Yep.
That's all there is to it. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom Paul Lisa. It's day 3 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Last night, it wasn't just Donald Trump's 2024 primary rivals who came out to support him at the convention, including Nikki Haley.
My message to them is simple. You don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for it.
Also there, some of the Republicans who ran against him in 2016. Bloomberg government Zach Cohen.
Senators Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, who notably in 2016 called for delegates to vote their conscience, and this time was very upfront and said everybody should support Donald Trump in his bid to return to the White House. Haley wasn't even actually slated to speak at the RNC. It was only after the shooting in Pennsylvania that wounded the former president that Haley ended up getting invited to and accepted that invitation from Trump to attend the convention as a show of unity, especially at a time when Democrats continue to be divided on whether Biden should remain at the top of the ticket on their side.
Bloomberg government Zach Cohen at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Nikki Haley had been a major critic of the former president. Meanwhile, former New Jersey governor and Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie watched Haley's speech.
It was a complete, incredible flip-flop from what she's done. Flip-flop, flip-flop. I don't think any Haley voters are going to care.
Former Governor Christie spoke to ABC. Russia and Ukraine exchanged a total of 190 prisoners in a swap mediated by the United Arab Emirates, the 6th such transfer this year. The defense ministry in Moscow said it handed over 95 Ukrainian prisoners and received 95 of its own military personnel. The ministry and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Telegram the UAE provided humanitarian mediation for the exchange. Severe storms could threaten 48 million people in the east today. Tornadoes and destructive winds ripped through parts of central New York yesterday, triggering a state of emergency. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom Paul Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Somebody out on YouTube, thank you so much, said, where's the green bow tie from? Sort of like it's a blue-green, right?
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
It's fashion for it's a French shop, a little pickup French shop, and I'm going large, and I got my haircut. I go to Delta. People say, where do you get your haircut? It's over in Lexington, old school. They got the little spiral bar thing. Yeah. Moses holds court there. I walk in, they start laughing. They give me a discount. There's so little hair. But they all listen. I mean, it's great. The people over at Delta's Men's Hairstyle, thank you for listening here on Bloomberg 1130 and on YouTube. And they came bearing gifts.
Wow.
And it says Michael Barr. Whoa. And I think, Paul, you're so cut and chiseled, you don't need it. We got to give this to Lisa for her husband who's out of control on Amazon Prime.
There we go.
Some of our contestants this morning used Clubman Pinode Gents Gin. Pinode, iconic, Lisa, within men's. They're making aftershave that smells like whatever cocktail you want, like tequila or whiskey or that. Or and gin. Somehow Moses picked out Gent's Gin for me. I have no idea.
But, on the back it says flammable.
Yeah, that's
Stay away from flames.
They need to put that in for me.
Elements, Michael. Elements of lime, red cedar, juniper, and gin accord.
By Gent's Gin.
Yeah. He splashed that puppy on me. I walked in, Mrs. Keene is like, where have you been?
There you go. Now you're in trouble.
So we thank Delta Hairstylists for having the Mateo household smell like a third martini. Great.
It does.
Oh, wait, let me smell it.
It does
like
smell
like a martini?
It smells like gin.
Yes, it does.
Back away, Michael Barr.
I could you could say you got it on Amazon Prime. Futures at -57, the VIX 13.98. Some tension in the market. I'm not sure Lisa's going to be able to do the business flash after the Gent's Gin. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. NASDAQ futures leading the losses this morning, down nearly 1.5%. We have S&P futures down nearly 1%. Dow futures down about 0.2%. The 2-year yield, 4.47%, up 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.18%, and that's up 2 basis points. We have spot gold higher, $2,473 an ounce. Brent crude, $84 a barrel. WTI crude, $81 a barrel. More economic data out. U.S. home construction picked up in June. That was thanks to a gain in multifamily projects. The prior month, that was revised up. Building permits, that rose about 3.4%. And then U.S. mortgage rates fell last week, their lowest level since early March. Mortgage Bankers Association says the contract rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage dropped to 6.87%. What's moving the markets? Google-backed GitLab shares up 12%. Reuters reporting it's exploring a sale after some interest. And shares of Roche up 6% in Switzerland after promising early-stage study results for its experimental weight loss pill. And Amazon on day 2 of Prime Day, shares down nearly 1%. Report showed sales actually climbed 12% the first 7 hours of Prime Day versus last year. A lot of people sounding off on the chat about Prime Day. One person saying Prime is for people that miss Christmas and have more dollars than cents. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
A little message there for the Mateo house, I believe. Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. This summer of 2024 in journalism, there is no one under greater scrutiny than Brad Stone. He's editor of Bloomberg Businessweek, and he's done the impossible. He launched a monthly Bloomberg Businessweek, and I do agree to keep the name Businessweek. You have to from our childhood. And he hit the ball deep to left field. In the Red Sox terminology, Brad Stone, it's over the wall, over the turnpike, over the cask and flagon, with a thick, readable magazine centered around Arnault and Louis Vuitton and Tiffany and such. To do it again a month later is extraordinary. And last night, Mr. Stone and his team launched a new Bloomberg Businessweek issue with Donald Trump on the cover. Brad, congratulations. Before we get to the Trump interview on Jerome Powell and so much, what is the thrust of the new monthly Bloomberg Businessweek? What is the Brad Stone message to your troops?
Well, first of all, Tom, thank you. And, you know, I'm from Cleveland, so really that ball's landing on East 9th Street. But no, I appreciate it. Look, it's a monthly magazine. We got 12 cracks at that cover story a year. We want an iconic business leader or political leader or personality, business personality on that cover. We're aiming high. So, yeah, Bernard Arnault was setting the standard with the first issue. Obviously, the Olympics going to Paris, and he's one of the wealthiest people in the world, very poorly understood. For the second issue, we put letters out to both campaigns asking for time with each candidate. The Trump campaign responded, and I went down there with Mario Parker, our wonderful editor, Nancy Cook, and Josh Green.
What was the distinction? What did you learn from Mr. Trump? What was the singular surprise in Florida?
Well, I mean, we can get into the details of what he said, but, you know, of course, I had never met President Trump in person. And I have to say, you know, when you put him in front of a camera or in front of a crowd, you know, he speaks with a great sense of grievance, particularly with regards to the media. And I think the biggest surprise was in person, he's solicitous. You know, he tries to play the host. You know, was wanted. Look, this is no great insight into the psychology of someone we've all been studying for over a decade, but he wants people to like him. I showed him the Arnault cover, and he wanted to know if Arnault had said anything about him, if he was on his side, so to speak. And of course, I told him that I'd written 2 books about Amazon and Jeff Bezos, and he wanted to know.
That must have gone well.
Yeah, well, no. In the interview, of course, he rails against the Washington Post. As I was chatting with him afterwards, he wanted to know if Lauren Sanchez, Bezos' fiance, was a Trump fan. So that might tell you a little bit more about you know, he's calculating who's on his team and who's not.
Right.
Brad, what did you learn about what the president may envision if he were to get a second term?
Right. And back to Tom's first question, our lane is business and the economy. And so we went down there with a very specific mission to ask him about Trumponomics, what it meant, what his plans were beyond, some of the very broad strokes that have allowed proxies to come in with things like Project 2025 or a white paper saying that he would curb the independence of the Federal Reserve. And in some respects, he corrected the record. He said Jerome Powell that he'd let him serve out his full term to May 2026 as chairman. He kind of caveated that if I like what he's doing. He said that he could consider Jamie Dimon for Treasury Secretary. And then in terms of the broad strokes, it's an unorthodox economic plan because he's attacking inflation, but then he talks about 10% tariffs across the board, maybe 100% tariffs for China, lowering the corporate tax rate. He said even maybe to 15%. He likes big round numbers. Shutting down immigration at the border, which would, of course, tighten an already tight labor market and maybe raise wages and then potentially raise prices. So, there's some contradiction there.
Where is corporate America, do you think, vis-a-vis Donald Trump? Or maybe how does Donald Trump view corporate America and the support that are they on his team? Are they not on his team?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I mean, so first of all, we did ask him, and I have to say this was June 25th in Mar-a-Lago. So 2 days before the debate and almost 2 weeks before the assassination attempt. And at the time, you really had no one. And we quizzed him on that, and he kind of bristled. He said that the meeting with the Business Roundtable, despite what had been reported, was a love fest. He said they like you when you're leading, which was an interesting sort of glimmer of self-awareness from him.
Yeah.
But, in terms of where they are, I think there are two places. One, there's kind of explicit and contrarian support among some business leaders in Silicon Valley, like Elon Musk recently. And then there's quiet. And I wrote my editor's letter about this. And other than, some maybe braver individuals, Reid Hoffman, the executive chairman of LinkedIn, et cetera, they're keeping their nose down because this is a president who was, a bit vindictive towards perceived enemies. And he still brings up Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook because he believes he got wronged by Zuckerberg after January 6th when he was kicked off the platform. So there's really no game in it for business leaders to kind of take a side, particularly if they're running a big public company and have an obligation to the shareholders.
Brad, we got to get you on for like a 1 hour interview, 3 hour interview. I got to get you questions. Let me go back to James Dimon. Brad, your take here, and of course with your world-class ownership of the Amazon story, I've sat 7 feet behind Donald Trump as he spoke to the business elite of Wall Street at the Economic Club of New York. You're telling me Secretary Dimon is going to listen to Donald Trump? Help me with that.
Well, it's funny because one of the things that he did say when we said, what would be different this time around with the suggestion that, he sort of, killed himself with his own chaos and, unpredictability the last time around. And what his big revelation was, well, this time I know everyone. I'm more experienced. And he even said that, he made some mistakes last time, that he selected some people. And of course, now we know who they are, leading right up to the former vice president who ultimately were not with him. So he'd surround him with sycophants. So I do think it's a good, this is what he said, that Jamie Dimon, he'd wanted him in his administration, or Glenn Youngkin. But it's a great question. Why would they do that, considering where so many of those cabinet members ended up the last time around?
Brad, thank you so much. I hope we make this a monthly affair. Folks, I can't say enough about this. In my house, I only collect successful magazines. And to be honest, Paul, they're like thickness. And Brad Stone has delivered a beautifully thick magazine. It's like Tyler Burleigh's Monocle. It's like the World of Interiors. These are like real magazines that we remember. Brad Stone, congratulations. Most important of 21,000 Bloomberg employees right now, the resurrection of Bloomberg Businessweek. Mr. Trump on the cover this month, and the path of rates signals the bond market above risk as well. Play Dave Mason, English songwriter, huge. He used to open for CSN. We're doing that today. Wow. One S. Winwood. This is from his Ute. Stevie Winwood. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo with us as well. All together again. Drawdown. Major correction underway. I think we're down 2% on futures. NASDAQ futures down 2%. SPX waddles back 1%. Paul Sweeney, it's a correction.
It's a correction. You know, we had that little pullback in April, about 5% in the market.
It was like 5.
Exactly. And, people were asking, is that it?
I went to cash.
Exactly. So we'll see how this plays out. But it's had a nice run here. So a little bit of pullback here led by some of the tech names. A little bit of concern out there about maybe some tighter tariffs, whoever's in the Oval Office.
Shout out to Brad Stone. We just had him on. He's the most important guy in journalism right now. He's got 2 huge magazines back to back.
Yep.
And they're thick. Thanks to all the people that want to be part of Bloomberg Magazine. It was good to see Patek Philippe in there and others advertising. It's, Brad only does fancy stuff.
Exactly. Real journalism in there, some deep dive stories.
Timex wanted 2 pages. No, we can't do that.
So it's good stuff. We'll see about that. It's going to hit this
Donald
today,
Trump on the cover. And as you said, we were on break. And yes, folks, it's true. Sweeney and I actually talk on break. But you said it brilliantly. What a challenge to do that interview. And then you have the debate uproar, the Biden uproar, and then an assassination attempt.
Yeah, just extraordinary. Talk about a fluid situation.
It's just, a huge effort by Nancy Cook and Brad Stone and the team as well. Futures, my eyes are failing. Is that a 6, negative 60?
Yeah, negative 60, 1% down.
1%. Of course, it's the, we say welcome this morning as well. And the foreign exchange market's showing weaker dollar. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got futures really taking a hit. A big part of that worries that U.S. politicians taking a harder stance on China, on Taiwan. That's really sparking this pullback across technology shares. Let's break down the numbers right now. We have NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. S&P futures down more than 1%. Dow futures down about 0.3%. Now that news, more strict trading curbs has shares of ASML holding lower. Those ADRs down 8%. That's even despite a second quarter booking beat. Shares of NVIDIA down 4%. Advanced Micro Devices down 4%. Broadcom down 3%. Slump in technology stocks also leading Europe's stock 600 lower. That is down about 0.6%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.46%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.18%, and that's up 2 basis points. To earnings we go. Johnson & Johnson down about 0.1%, cut its full-year profit forecast to account for those costs tied to a number of recent acquisitions. And then Adidas down more than 1% in Germany, even though it raised its annual profit target for the second time in 3 months. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Fed independence is a huge deal. It really goes back, just to do a mini bit here. In 1907, the Panic of 07, J.P. Morgan flat out wrote a check to save the company. 3-4 years later, 1912, a Federal Reserve was invented. It was birthed. And to be honest, it doesn't look anything like this Fed. And they had to go through a number of times, including Eccles in the 30s, which is the Eccles building in Washington now. And it really begins in 1951 with William McChesney Martin. And he and others declared independence from the administrations, plural. The heart of the Trump interview by Brad Stone is on Jerome Powell, who has a date with destiny, January 31, 2028. Joining us on Why This Matters, Ira Jersey, driving all of fixed income at Bloomberg Intelligence. Ira, why do you care that President Trump says Jerome Powell can stay around forever?
Well, first, keep in mind that his term as chair actually ends before that. So he's he can stay on as a governor after he's Fed chair, which is interesting. And I don't know if it's ever happened before. Someone can fact check me on that. That it may have happened once, but so the Fed chair is actually an independent office from being a board member typically. So you can have two different overlapping terms for sure. I think it's important in a couple of reasons. One is that we'll see out at least the current policy regime that we see. But importantly, in the Bloomberg interview and the articles around the Bloomberg interview, he mentioned Kevin Hassett as a potential replacement for Jerome Powell, basically a year into his term as Fed chair. So it's someone who, that Donald Trump knows. They worked on the administrations already. He has a lot of Washington experience. So worked on, campaigns for George Bush Jr. as well as John McCain and Mitt Romney. And worked for Trump. So it's someone who he knows. Interestingly, I'm not sure that Kevin Hassett is as dovish as I would have thought Donald Trump would want someone to be. Now, he's probably somewhat more dovish than Jay Powell, but at the same time, I still would expect Donald Trump to appoint someone who he knows is going to be a dove. And Kevin Hassett, I think, is a little bit more mainstream than that.
So given where we are with the current Fed, it looks like the bond market's pricing in rate cuts. I mean, you have the 2-year Treasury down to 4.46, up 5 basis points today, but it's been really pulling back here. Is that the market kind of doing the Fed's job for it?
Yeah, a little bit. So Paul, we've noted that the market went all the way from pricing in almost 7 cuts in January to pricing out almost any cuts this year a couple of weeks ago, and now we're back to pricing a couple of cuts this year. But importantly, and I think that this is where I'm looking at, I don't really care if the Fed cuts twice this year or one time this year. It's what then do they do in 2025, and how low do interest rates get by the end of next year? Because that will affect the entire yield curve a lot more dramatically than just exactly when they start, and do they go 25 or 50 now. It's more, do they go 200 or do they go 250 or 300 basis points by the end of the entire cutting cycle. And at this point, we're now priced for about 200 basis points of interest rate cuts. But if that moves significantly, that's really where you're going to see a even bigger shift than what we've seen so far. The yield curve will uninvert, so 2-year yields are still trading above 10-year yields, for example. As the Fed cuts, that will likely uninvert. It's just mathematically probably the case. Importantly, we talk about the Trump trade, Paul, and the Trump trade is long-term interest rates might go up because of things like tariffs causing inflation to go higher, things like potentially tax cuts increasing the deficit a little bit. Those are the types of activities that you might ultimately see as we get a little bit deeper into this political cycle.
So that 200 rate cuts that the market's looking for, does that seem reasonable to you by end of 25?
I suspect at the end that the Fed will ultimately cut a little bit more than that. What the market, what we always miss is that, yes, the market's pricing for 200 basis points of cuts, but it doesn't really believe it's 200. It's more that, okay, 200 is kind of a base case, but there's a big risk that they only cut 100 basis points, and there's a big risk that they cut 300 basis points. So there's a distribution around that kind of average mean expectation, which I think is how you have to view that 200 basis points. So it's not unrealistic given the data that we have and some of the outlooks. But I think that the risk is that the economy actually gets much worse than the market's anticipating, and that's why I think that ultimately the Fed will cut even more.
So I love this phrase. It's so Ira Jersey, average mean. What's your average mean then on the 10-year yield after 200 beeps of rate cuts? I mean, are we just completely misjudging the 10-year yield to 3.5%?
So I think the 10-year yield ends up at the end of the cycle about a year and a half or 2 years from now, below 3.5%, but above 3. Wow. So the idea is that the yield curve does uninvert. You wind up having the 2-year yield with a 2 handle, so call it 2 3/4, 2.5% kind of area. But the 10-year yield is dragged down as the Federal Reserve cuts pretty aggressively. But ultimately that yield curve is still going to price for the Fed to eventually hike interest rates. So I do think, if we think about this from like a neutral rate perspective, so that R star, that dreaded R star, we almost everyone thinks that it's higher than it was during the inter-crisis period. But the question is at 3.5%, what level is that at? Where so let's just say it's at 3.5%, which seems as reasonable as any other guess that anyone will have. That means that in order to stimulate the economy, you have to cut to below that. So that's why I think that if the Fed does have to make easy monetary policy, it's going to have a 2 handle probably to get there.
Ira, if England takes you to replace Southgate as coach, just let us know so we can do an exit interview. Ira Jersey on soccer, and of course, fixed income with Bloomberg Intelligence. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. A few months after being the last candidate to drop out of the primary race, Nikki Haley made a last-minute appearance at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee Tuesday night. Haley brought her support to former President Trump and displayed unity in the party.
I'll start by making one thing perfectly clear. Donald Trump has my strong endorsement, period.
Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, Senator J.D. Vance, is expected to give his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention tonight. In a new Democratic campaign video released this morning, Vice President Kamala Harris says Trump's new running mate will be a rubber stamp for Trump and his extreme agenda.
Unlike Mike Pence, Vance said he would have carried out Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election.
Vice President Harris says Vance supports a national abortion ban and voted against protecting IVF. The Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General says it has opened up an investigation into the U.S. Secret Service handling of security for former President Donald Trump on the day a gunman tried to assassinate him at a Pennsylvania rally. President Joe Biden already had directed an independent review of the security at the rally. Britain's King Charles III spoke at the opening day of Parliament in London this morning. King Charles spoke to the House of Commons and House of Lords, mapping out a legislative agenda for the new Labour government under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, including support for Ukraine.
My government will continue to give its full support to Ukraine and its people, and it will endeavour to play a leading role in providing Ukraine with a clear path to NATO membership.
King Charles also says his government recognizes the urgency of the global climate challenge. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney, what's the world look like with a 3.5% 10-year yield? I can't frame it.
No, but I mean, the mortgage market would certainly like that. Maybe get some
sub
free
6% mortgage rate?
Oh yeah. Maybe. I mean, you got to be talking certainly sub 6.
So right now in the suburbs, hitters like Michael Barr, they're showing up with all cash, and they're buying. And David Sansar was telling me they're selling houses in 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, his wife is a major hitter up there in that Westchester area.
So what happens with a 3.5% 10-year yield?
I think a lot of people that are sitting on their homes because they don't want to go refinance or buy a new home at a higher mortgage, they're going to start putting their homes up on the market. That's going to bring a lot of supply.
There'll be more supply, but come on, price has to moonshot.
Well, it has. I mean, the housing is brutal. I mean, I think one Lisa Mateo was thinking about becoming a real estate tycoon.
I can understand. I don't know. I'm trying to frame folks 3.5% 10-year yield, and I can't get there. Other than, I guess, extended bull market. It's not my opinion. I'm just guessing. There's no guess to the pullback. The VIX 14.04. That's a long way from a 12 handle. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling after the S&P 500 notched a fresh all-time record yesterday. S&P futures right now. We'll check in with them down 1%. NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. We have Dow futures down 0.3%. The 2-year yield 4.47%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.18%, and that's up 2 basis points. To currencies, the dollar weaker. The Japanese yen extending gains to more than 1%. At 156.42 against the dollar. The pound top 130 for the first time in a year. Right now, the British pound at 130.34 against the dollar. Moving the markets, discount retailer Five Below down 14%. That's after the company cut second quarter earnings per share guidance. It also announced that CEO Joel Anderson will be stepping down. Spirit Airlines down 5%. The company estimated total revenue for the second quarter would be lower than previously expected. And United Airlines reports earnings after the close. Ahead of it, their shares down 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. In my youth, like anybody else, I had sets of grandparents, and one of those grandparents' sets was from the Midwest, and the Bible was the Chicago Tribune.
Mm-hmm.
And the tone of the Chicago Tribune, this goes back after World War I, was we're going to stay out of it. We have oceans. We have an ocean to the right. We've got an ocean to the left. Canada is an ocean to the north. Latin America didn't exist. Good morning to all of you listening to us in Mexico and beyond. But the answer is there was a sense of isolationism, and that is in play here, particularly led by the vice presidential candidate, Senator Vance of Ohio, has made real clear with Ukraine and others, we need to stay at home. To me, that's a huge unwritten theme yet, Paul.
It is, and it'd be interesting to see to what extent that gets reflected in this Republican convention and some of the other speeches we're going to hear from former President Trump, most notably. But even calling up J.D. Vance, calling up Taiwan, and and the president talking about Taiwan as well in the Bloomberg Businessweek.
I wonder what we'll hear tonight. I mean, Joe Matthew and Caitlin Lyons will lead our coverage. You and I will be aside getting ready for tomorrow morning. But I'm absolutely fascinated how they speak to a military in America that supports Donald Trump. I don't know what the poll numbers are. I don't have them in front of me, and I don't mean officer versus enlisted. But I'm just suggesting, Paul, it's a huge mystery tonight how Senator Vance approaches the second-term Trump foreign policy.
Exactly.
It's maybe the great mystery that
it is. It is one of the great mysteries. And again, there's so many hotspots in the world, whether it be the Middle East or Ukraine or China.
Definitive on this is James Stavridis. He joined the U.S. Navy when it was the least popular thing to do in our modern lifetimes. I'm going to guess 1975. His first ship was out of San Diego with the Padres in the background and went across the Pacific Ocean and beyond. He's a former Supreme Commander of NATO. Too short a visit today with James Stavridis. I want you to discuss, James, I don't know if you heard it, but as we were coming into us, we were speaking of the Chicago Tribune isolationism, which is comfort for Senator Vance. How do you explain to Republicans that isolationism just doesn't work?
3 reasons. One, let's look at history. Late 20s, we tried this. We walked away from the League of Nations. We built enormous tariff barriers, the Hawley-Smoot tariffs. We isolated from the world. How did that work out? We cracked the global economy. You can drop a plumb line to fascism. So history is instructive. Number 2, we're so globally interconnected economically that trying to simply walk away from the world in a geopolitical sense will crack those relationships and leave Russia free to operate and do what it wants, to quote somebody, in Europe, or China to do the same in Asia. So the trade, the economics. And third, and maybe most important, it's the values. If we isolate ourselves, the jungle will grow back, and democracy, liberty, freedom, all of the things we cherish will be at risk. I think those are the 3 key arguments, Tom.
So, Admiral, what is your view at this stage about how a second Trump presidency would unfold in terms of, some of our geopolitical military policies?
Well, we just discussed the big concern would be isolationism, would be anti-interventionism, if you will, a sense that, hey, let's just come home, let's not worry about the world. Again, we've tried that. It won't work. It fails in a number of reasons. So isolationism concerns me. Second is the generally erratic nature of foreign policy in Trump 1. 1 minute, we're going to attack North Korea. Little Rocket Man is enemy number 1. The next minute, we're doing love letters with President Xi of China. We're erecting big tariff barriers. But right before that, he comes to Mar-a-Lago for a wonderful, friendly dinner. All of that erratic behavior, I think, is very concerning. And then third and finally, it's and it's connected to the first one, it's the divisiveness that this will probably engender here at home, which weakens us abroad.
Admiral, in the time we've got left with you, it's easy to go to Ukraine. We'll do that with you. I hope we can get another conversation on Ukraine soon, Admiral Stavridis. I want to go to the real world, and this is the Stravridis world. It's not the romance. It's like 100-degree heat, and you're out in the ocean. You're going, where am I? Jim, it's the exercise Tiger Triumph 2024 between India and the United States of America in the middle of nowhere in the Indian Ocean. And the answer is we've got people at risk there. The 5th Marine Expeditionary Unit, the P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol, etc. I'd suggest most Americans don't even understand we're in the Indian Ocean.
The Indian Ocean is going to be a key economic area. India is growing powerfully. When the history of this century is written 200 years from now, it won't be about the rise of China. It'll be about the rise of India. So the more the United States operates, engages with India, and by the way, brings along Japan and Australia to create that Quad alliance structure in the Pacific, the better off we'll be. I think.
Well, I'm going to interrupt because we're running out of time. Admiral Stavridis, it's simple. You're going to bring along Japan. How do you bring along the Republican Party?
Well, I'll say it's easier to bring along Japan because they're facing real threats right in front of them from China and North Korea. The way you bring along the Republican Party is doing exactly what we're doing now, Tom. It's having the conversation, it's persuasion, it is showing the facts and doing it all in a civil, sensible way that gets us out of this politics of violence and back to a politics of intellectual discussion and policy.
James Stavridis, thank you so much. Too short a visit. We'll talk Ukraine next time with the former Supreme Commander of NATO. My book of the summer, Paul, I think 2 years ago, I can't keep track. 2034. Someone said to me the other day, what's the one book to read about China? And I said, try fiction. Stravridis, Ackerman, 2034. They've got a sequel out. It was so successful. 2054. Buy them together and throw them at the most mouthy college person you have home this summer. Just say, shut up and read this.
Shut up and read it. Yep.
It's just like a 2034. Stravridis and Ackerman. Can't say enough about it. What'd you learn there, Paul? That was something.
Well, I think it was classic Admiral Stavridis. Not a fan of isolationism for the reasons he cited, and not the least of which is because we've seen in history bad things can happen when the United States does that. And so there are some risks out there, but we see it every day, Tom. Again, with the Ukraine, with the Middle East, and there's concerns obviously in China as over Taiwan. So the question is, how does the U.S. deal with it? Does it engage or does it isolate itself?
I would suggest our Defense Department, I've had the honor of talking to Secretaries of Defense about this, they got to sell what we're doing. The Golden Swordsman, VP-47 from Whidbey Island, Washington, is at Aomori, Japan, as part of Commander Task Force 72. I have no idea what I just said, other than we're worldwide. Good morning, and worldwide, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how will the markets react to stricter American trading curbs on China? It's really taking a toll on futures this morning. Also had more economic data. U.S. home construction picked up in June thanks to a gain in multifamily projects. Building permits rose 3.4%, and industrial production for June, the survey was for 0.3%, came in at 0.6%. Let's get to it as we're off and running. We'll start with the S&P 500 down 1% at 58 points at 5,608. The Dow down about 0.1%, 65 points at 40,894. The Nasdaq down more than 1.5%, 318 points at 18,191. The two-year yield 4.47%. That's up 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.18%, and that's up 2 basis points. We have spot gold higher, $2,474 an ounce. NYMEX crude $82. We have Brent crude $84 a barrel. At the open, I want to check in with ASML Holdings, really taking a hit from that news over trading curbs. They are down 9%. And then you look at NVIDIA down 4%. Same for AMD, and Broadcom also down 4%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. World class. VIX 14.0 at 1. The great joy of talking to Mr. Schrimmer of Churchill Financial, part of Nuveen, is work at J.P. Morgan Chase over the years and BNP Paribas, is he writes in English. It's most of these guys, they got they got some guy co-editing it who's got an English major from, Bowdoin or something. No, this is in English. How about this, Paul? Yields are double digit with low vol and stable risk. Boom. The free lunch of private equity and private credit.
I can sell that. Randy Schwimmer joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. He's a vice chairman and co-head of senior lending at Churchill Asset Management. One of our frequent guests was we want to get a little bit smarter about this private credit business, which has really exploded into a significant asset class over the last dozen years or so. Randy, thanks so much for joining us here. Higher rates today than we had over the last several years. So there's a lot of places I can get yield now. What do you say to your investors about what private credit can deliver for them these days?
First of all, thanks for having me again. When I was here in May, things were a little unsettled in the overall markets. Investors weren't really sure what was going to happen with rates and inflation. And now what's happened, it feels like we're actually in a, unbelievably given events of the last few days, in a somewhat stable capital markets environment. So first of all, I think there are 3 things that are not going to change. Number one, I think rate expectations, right? Feels like the Fed settled into rate cuts, September, whatever. We're probably going to see 1 to 3, depending on your expectations, but definitely direction is down. Number 2, the economy is kind of in a slow growth, low inflation environment. It feels like that's going to continue, no change there. The other thing, to your point, is the availability of private capital now is unquestioned. In this current environment, there's so much availability of dry powder with managers such as ourselves who are putting money to work for their clients. So on behalf of both the issuers and investors, what we think will change, to your point about, from an investor perspective, the M&A climate right now, which has been seized up because financing rates were high, is starting to melt. That $3 trillion of unexited value that I mentioned last time, we're starting to see that iceberg melt as interest rates start to come down. So you're going to start to see the bid-ask spread start to narrow, and you're going to start to see realization. So the second thing that's going to change is private equity fundraising is going to improve. The LPs have been waiting for money to come back to them because the exits haven't been happening. They're like, well, I'm not going to invest in Fund 5 if you haven't even given me money back in Fund 4. Now they're going to start seeing money coming back to them as these exits happen. So fundraising is going to improve. So the third thing that I think is going to change for the better is we're going to see more deal financings. Now, in the large cap market, there's been a record $700 billion. So I always have a fun fact for you. $700 billion record volume in the leveraged loan market. That's the liquid market in only 6 months, okay? And only $40 billion of that $700 billion is for new deals. So where's the rest of it going? It's the year of the refi. All these higher priced deals are getting refinanced in the public markets. We are now in the private markets, we're starting to see even more new deal flow. So actually, our ratio is more like 50-50. 50% new deals, 50% refinancings. And I think that's going to improve. So look, the outlook for investors is good because rates are going to come down, but it's going to take, I don't know, 2.5 to 3 years for rates to come back down from 5.5 where they are now with Fed funds rate to 2.5%, 2%, something like that, wherever they end up. That's going to take 2.5 to 3 years of slow because they're not going to go 75 basis points per jump. So very positive for investors. They're going to get yield, as Tom mentioned at the top. They're going to get safety, lower risk, and less vol.
How many pitch books come into your doors on a weekly basis from these private equity players looking for your capital?
1,000 a year, so whatever that
Okay.
is. We do about 50 of them, so we're pretty selective.
Okay.
What's the key attribute of that selection process?
Credit risk, because for our business on the senior debt side, you either get your principal and interest back or you don't. There's no upside. Now, for the equity deals that we're doing, very different because there is upside. So we tend to be a little more accommodating for some of the higher growth opportunities. But for the senior debt business, and frankly, as that translates to investors, they're looking for right now 10, 11, 12% yield. If that gets deteriorated by losses, that hurts. Our losses are so low that they don't impact the overall returns, and we want to keep it that way.
4 years ago on Netflix, there was a spectacular Anya Taylor-Joy vehicle called The Queen's Gambit. It was about chess.
Yes.
People look, Randy, at your business is the chessboard and the ceiling that she's visualizing. They look at it as financialization. It's all people moving money around, this very complex transactions, adults in the room like you. What's the benefit to society of $700 gazillion sloshing around?
Yeah, so the beauty of our market, Churchill focuses on the middle market, and I've talked about this before. So these are a universe right now of about 300,000 companies in the United States that represent 70% of the growth of the economy and close to 50% of the job growth, okay? The private equity investments in that 300,000 is probably about 10,000, which means the white space for investors is huge. And the middle market is where the jobs and the growth are. And that's frankly, if you looked at the GDP of the middle market itself and scaled it as if it was a country, it would be the third largest in the world, okay? Below China, above Japan. What that means is that's where the opportunities are for businesses that can't get capital from the banks because the banks have abandoned the middle market.
This is the key sentence.
They've abandoned the middle market.
Paul, jump in here. You live this. To me, that's the key sentence. It's like Chemical Bank 1,000,000 years ago. They got nowhere to go.
Yeah. So, I mean, is this because the regional banks that might finance some of this, from a regulatory standpoint, it's just not as good a business as it used to be?
Well, they won't let them. The regulators won't let them hold that paper, right? Because
Okay.
they think it's quote risky loans. Okay. So
they have to syndicate it.
Yeah, they get it off their. They can't wait to get it off their balance sheet. We can't wait to get it on our balance sheet on behalf of our investors. But as I mentioned, we're really, really picky. So the benefit to society is that as these companies are looking for capital, especially now, right, when the markets are really focused on the large deals, where we come into play is being able to take these companies with private equity capital, beneath us, to help support their growth. And you see these entrepreneurs and founders, and this is the part, Paul and Tom, that I love about the business. These founders and entrepreneurs who start these companies up with an idea, and the next thing you know, they've grown them to hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, but then they're looking for capital. So they look to private equity sponsors to say, can you provide me with management support and financial support to take me to the next level?
Now that we've got exit beginning to happen, what do the internal rates of return look like? Folks, an internal rate of return is an iterative process that you flunk on any CFA exam. If you're measuring IRR after the logjam post-pandemic that we've seen, what is the IRR doing as a general statement?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and every private equity sponsor that goes into a deal has their own expectations of where the IRR is.
So where's it coming out?
So, I mean, 15%, 20% right now, I mean, the return on private equity investments is 20 to 30%. So that
per year.
So
Too good to be true.
these are the best investments with the best private equity sponsors in the world.
Right. Paul, this is where when I'm talking to David Rubenstein and I ask him a rude question like that,
Yep.
he starts talking about the Baltimore Orioles.
Switches
How
to
about
topic.
that middle relief?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Yeah.
All right, so Randy, just real quick, one more here. What are the sectors that you guys are most comfortable putting money to work in? Is it just a is it a business or is it just a cash flow profile?
So here's the thing. If you look at, to the point about middle market companies, all right, where do private equity firms look for growth? They look for the unexplored value opportunity. Where is there growth that has not yet been tapped? So for example, if you're a owner of a car wash in my hometown, Greenwich, Connecticut, okay, and you...
It's quite a car wash.
All right, and there's 3 car washes actually in Greenwich. This business expanded over the last 30 years, and they started to expand territorially. Private equity firm came in and said, you know what, we can give you capital to grow even more. Today, that business has probably got 100+ different car washes all over the geographic area. That is a perfect example of scale that drives value, because now that car wash can take the cost of capital and lower it and improve the returns and create wealth for the managers.
Rich,
and
we got to go. We're out of time. Make a note. We got to get Randy back. This is too important discussion. I know. Because, I mean, this is where the bank, they said the banks, you can't do this.
I'm here for you guys.
With
Thank
Churchill
you.
Financial, Randy Schrimmer, thank you so much. Red and green on the screen. Interesting churn to the market. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you kindly. Today, the Republican National Convention will begin its third day in Milwaukee. Last night, Donald Trump's former primary challenger, Nikki Haley, called for party unity in a speech at the RNC.
For the sake of our nation, we have to go with Donald Trump.
The former South Carolina governor and UN ambassador had released her delegates to vote for Trump at the nominating convention. Former Haley delegate and New Hampshire State Senator Bill Gannon said he thought Haley brought the party together with her speech.
Did a great job. I think she'll have a place in the administration. I think we're all coming together. We're going to dominate and knock out, be it Biden or whoever they put up.
Months ago, Haley was calling for Trump to step aside, and that did not go unnoticed by former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who called it a flip-flop.
And she was on that stage because she's tortured by her own ambition. She had to go up there if she wants to run again in 2028 in her own mind. And that was more important than her standing up for the things that she represented to the voters in the Republican primaries about Donald Trump being unfit.
Christie spoke to ABC. Tonight, Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, Senator J.D. Vance, is expected to give his acceptance speech at the RNC. In a new Democratic campaign video released this morning, Vice President Kamala Harris says Trump's new running mate will be a rubber stamp for Trump and his extreme agenda.
He supports a national abortion ban and voted against protecting IVF. And if elected, he will help implement the Extreme Project 2025 plan for a second Trump term, which would target critical programs like Head Start and Medicare.
Vice President Kamala Harris. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Lisa, Michael Barr walked in. I swear I smelled something. I think it's the gent's gin.
The gin? Are you?
The gin aftershave.
He smelled something.
It doesn't smell like Tanqueray. It smells like Beefeater, I think. I can't tell. You got the gent's gin from Club in Pinode going, good morning, Delta hairstylists, over on Lexington, a real manly barbershop where they serve gin and also have the Michael Barr gents. Gin.
Perfect.
It was perfect. Yes, it was. They do it right. Paul, that was great with Randy. The IRR he's quoting there, that's ginormous returns.
It's big, but it is below kind of what it was before, though. I mean, these the IRRs for these private equities, they were looking for low 20s, and they've
now
moderated.
They're coming in a little
that's
bit.
moderated, yeah. So,
but really
Still,
interesting and a
very
real
good,
sea change. If he says they're exiting and getting money back to investors, that's key.
Yeah, that is key.
From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a mix of red and green on the screen right now. We have NASDAQ futures up, down more than 1.5%. S&P 500 down about 1%. The Dow, though, up about 0.1% or 49 points. We head over to the 2-year yield at 4.45%, up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.17%. That's up 1 basis point. To currencies, a dollar weaker. Japanese yen at 156.29 against a dollar. We have the British pound stronger at 130.32 against a dollar. Moving the markets, discount retailer Five Below down 15%. It cut its second quarter earnings per share guidance. Also said that its CEO will be stepping down. And then shares of Google-backed GitLab up 10%. Reuters says it's exploring a sale after some interest. And finally, Spirit Airlines down 9%. It estimated total revenue for the second quarter would be lower than previously expected. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Long ago and far away, Timothy O'Brien, who owns knowledge of President Trump's finances like no one ever through dogged research work, wrote a book called The Lincoln Conspiracy, where he dived into the 19th century from 1850 out to a horrific day in 1865. Timothy O'Brien drives Bloomberg Opinion forward each day and joins us this morning from Milwaukee. Tim O'Brien, just as a general statement, as President Trump's life has changed, as he sits in Milwaukee, are his legal troubles beyond him now? Is he close enough to the campaign and to November 5th, where all of a sudden the set of legal issues is behind him?
Well, I think certainly, Tom, if he gets elected in November, the federal cases will be behind him because he'd have the power to dismiss both of those cases. The president appoints the attorney justice. The president essentially, has control through the attorney general, if a president wishes, of the Justice Department. So the two federal cases, the January 6th case and the classified documents case, which was just dismissed on Monday by Judge Cannon, would be in his purview to simply drop. There's two, there's the Georgia case that's still in motion, an election fraud case that he wouldn't have any control over, but that's been slowed down as well. I wouldn't say it's entirely behind him, but for someone who was facing a flotilla of existential lawsuits, the cards have certainly fallen in his favor in recent months and certainly going forward, it looks like.
Hey, Tim, I know you're in Milwaukee at the convention. I think just from appearances, what you see on TV, and particularly last night with Nikki Haley and her speech, are certainly projecting a sense of unity within the Republican Party. You're on the floor. You're there. Is that, in fact, the case?
Oh, I think it's absolutely the case. I think there's a lot of momentum here. Momentum is perhaps one of those valuable assets in a political campaign and a political moment. And I think, these amazing events, of recent weeks, I think from Joe Biden's belly flop during the debate with Trump to the assassination attempt over the weekend, last weekend, the failed assassination attempt, thankfully. There is a kind of energy around the GOP right now, and particularly Trump's campaign, that I don't know existed prior to the debate. There's a lot of time, though, between now and November. It's 4 months is a lifetime in an election, so things could change. But the Democrats are at war with one another about whether Biden should stay in the race. And what you saw last night, I think, was Trump's former opponents coming out and kissing the ring. I mean, and Tim O'Brien, and essentially disavowing a lot of the criticisms they had of him prior.
I mean, Tim, one of the great jobs you have is you don't have to do anything because you got Francis Wilkinson to do the real heavy lifting. Folks, Francis Wilkinson is legendary in Rolling Stone, and he writes for Bloomberg Opinion. And I'm sorry, it's the single best essay across all of media right now. Republicans have broken free of Barack Obama. And it's obviously, Tim O'Brien, two-way. It's the Democrats haven't. Discuss the two parties dealing with the legacy of the Obama years.
Well, I think, I think the Obama years also includes the financial crisis of 2008. I don't think you can separate those. I think I think two things came out of that era. One was the financial crisis itself dislocated average Americans and working Americans in powerful ways that I don't think either party fully addressed. People lost their pensions, their jobs, their mortgages, their children's college savings funds. The ripples of that event are still flowing through our politics and our economy. On top of it, you had in Barack Obama one of the most charismatic presidents of the modern era, a deft messenger for everything he stood for, who was also black. And I think the fact that he was the first president of color forced Americans to come to terms with how they feel about race and racial tolerance in the United States. And I think there are some unfortunate and tough lessons that have come out of that, which is that we are very much a country divided around those issues. I think Donald Trump's candidacy was essentially a disavowal that anyone had to worry about those things, that you could be a patriotic and functioning American without being tolerant. And I think Trump is testing us in a different way. But the momentum he has right now suggests that he can ride on that for some time.
Tim, on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, you mentioned kind of some dysfunction at the moment. How do you think this is going to play out over the coming days and weeks when the Republicans leave Milwaukee? Presumably, some of the attention will go back on the Democratic Party.
Well, I think they have to get their house in order first. Biden does not have complete confidence of his own party. He's done nothing since the debate in any of his public appearances, I think, to calm people down around the issues that concern voters and other supporters about him, which is, it's not simply a function of his age. It's whether he has the energy and the mental capacity to do the job properly, despite being surrounded by very responsible, capable people who have delivered incredible economic growth to the United States, outperforming its global peers. But that's fallen by the wayside because campaigns ultimately aren't about policy. They're about voters' emotional connection to their candidates. And Biden's on very, thin ice still, and it hasn't been put to sleep. And I think we're going to see next week, maybe a reckoning around some of this because it has to happen quickly. If the Democrats let this issue dangle, and if Biden himself lets it dangle, right. I think there's going to be very, very hard times coming for the Democrats in November.
Tim O'Brien, the essay, Trump's Divine Intervention, maybe just a talking point. Look for that at Bloomberg Opinion. I'll put that on social here on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. Tim O'Brien, safe travels in Milwaukee, his leadership at crafting Bloomberg Opinion each and every day. Paul, it's a pullback. Wait, that was green.
Exactly. That didn't last very long. So, we still got the S&P off about 0.8%, and the NASDAQ off about 1.6% here, but the Dow eking out a little bit of a gain there. So there you go.
To me, it's, you look at small stack. We didn't even talk about small caps today.
Yeah.
To me, it's just a massive short cover, either a direct short cover or just a behavioral short cover of saying, small caps are never going to go up again.
Right. Oops. That's right. So we've got small caps up again. The Russell 2000 up 0.6% here, continuing that gain. And then I saw a great little chart. I can't remember who had it, but really that move, and just in the last week or so, is relative to the S&P. They've never seen anything like that. NASDAQ. The Russell versus the S&P.
Did you see the meteor over New Jersey?
I did not see it, but we've got a lot of things in Jersey, so that's not like the least of our worries.
The earthquake.
Exactly.
We had an eclipse.
Some rain coming.
But believe it or not, sweater weather on the beach yesterday.
Really?
Really?
No.
No kidding. I know. And you walk in one block inland and you're back into the heater. But it was, it's just crazy. The winds we've had this summer have been like nothing I've seen. So anyway, there you go. The one non-heated spot on the globe, maybe.
I'm going to have to join you there.
We're going to toss out some songs that are like summer songs. You could do Love in the Spoonful, Hot Town Summer in the City and all that. But this is one of the greatest videos of all time. They took Backstreet Boys and Blink-182 just spoofed the whole thing right down to the Gulf Stream. It's a different Gulf Stream than
what you've had. Okay.
It's a different one than, Pharaoh took it to the England thing, but all the small things, Blink-182.
Okay.
It was a great summer video. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lines, Milwaukee, coming up.
You'll be at my show.